Hello. This is What If Luffy Ate the Sun Fruit. Please like and subscribe to my channel and check out the author and fanfiction linked in the description. Sadly, this is the last part because the original author decided to stop writing the story, so please enjoy the story. Nami took a deep breath, having a feeling that this was going to be her biggest challenge yet. With her claim attack broken and unable to be used even as a staff, she wouldn't be anywhere near as effective as she normally was. She'd have to rely on the Rakishiki, and unfortunately, she was already pretty tired from everything that had happened over the past hour. Just Crocodile drying her arm out and desiccating it was enough. That arm was still tingling, even if it wasn't quite numb. She couldn't quite make as good of a fist as she normally could with it. Meanwhile, Mr. 2 was fresh, and from all Robin had told them, there was a very good chance the man was in Sanji's tier. Or at least Sanji's tier without the Rakishiki and possibly Luffy's training. And speaking of Mr. 2, the ballerina was twirling around and making Nami feel dizzy just looking at him. Come now, little swan. All you have to do is get out of my way and I won't have to bust up that beautiful face of yours. He grinned widely, making Nami wonder if he had secretly eaten the rubber fruit instead of the copy fruit. His face was so damn stretchy and expressive. Yeah, you'll just go kill an innocent young princess instead. Nami replied dryly, we doing this or would you prefer an interpretive dance instead? And don't call me a little swan. Stop joking, ruined. Mr. 2 stopped twirling, don't say I didn't warn you. He dashed forward, his leg lancing out so quickly that Nami was abruptly certain that she did not want to get hit by him. She flowed around his leg with a graceful kami-e, feeling so glad that she had started taking her training seriously. Geez, you're fast. Ahahaha. Mr. 2 laughed, you dodged that. Impressive. His grin split his face again, and of course I am. I've trained relentlessly, day after day. Year after year. He held himself in the arabesque position, showing off his insane bodily control. That's how I perfected my Akama Kenpo, and it will never be surpassed by you, little swan. Ah, well, I definitely can't claim years of it. Nami smirked, but I'd say I've come quite far for just a couple months worth of training. She raised her legs slightly, for instance she smirked wider, and Mr. 2 was overcome by a sense of foreboding that had him start to sweat slightly. Rankyaku. She yelled, kicking up. As the blade of wind erupted from her, Mr. 2's eyes popped out of his skull and he got his body as straight as he could, throwing both arms into the air as he twirled away. He stopped, watching in shock as her attack carved straight through a building. His lipstick-ed lips were puckered as he stared at the carved-out front of the building. Stop joking, ruined. He yelled, that was dangerous. That was the point. Nami rolled her eyes to hide her worry. She was really hoping that she could have taken him out by surprise with that attack. She had barely managed her first Rankyaku on drum while running from the Lapins. She didn't have more than 3 of those from either leg before she'd barely be able to walk, much less fight. You can just give up, you know. I don't really want to hurt you. I just need to stop you from ruining Vivi's home. Mr. 2 pouted outrageously, unfortunately, little swan, it appears we are destined to be enemies then. Zero-chan has trusted me with the main portion of our operation and I can't let him down. For our utopia. Oh please. Now Nami scoffed, he's going to kill all of you, stupid. She crossed her arms, you probably don't even know about the bomb he's planted in here. One large enough that only he and his stupid sand powers could survive. Stop joking, ruined. Mr. 2's catchphrase was very annoying, but now he looked angry, the boss would never betray our dream. He rushed forward, and Nami cursed as she was forced to duck under a kick that shattered a storefront. Pardon my Akama Kenpo knuckle. Mr. 2's fist shot out at her face, and she was barely able to avoid it with kami-e. You won't escape my fists. Akama Kenpo. Drunken swan soiree. He yelled, a dizzying number of strikes flying from his limber arms. Shit, fuck, shitfic. Nami cursed, barely able to stay away from his fists even with kami-e. Such an ugly mouth on such a pretty face. Mr. 2 yelled with his grin back up, naughty, naughty. He launched a roundhouse kick at her head, which she dodged by throwing herself backwards. She planted her hands on the ground as she bent back for a back handspring. When her feet came up, she shot another Rankyaku at her nimble opponent, hissing slightly from the pain. She would definitely have to switch legs for the next one. The blade of wind grazed Mr. 2's shoulder, but that was enough for a tiny geyser of blood to erupt. Gah! He cried out, clutching his shoulder in pain. Ooh, now you've done it, little swan. He yelled at her. She yelled right back as she landed from her attack, stop calling me that, you stupid swan. Then I shall crush you with the power of my main no me. Mr. 2 declared, what's so amazing about it is the scope of my memory. He grinned, for example, I can use it to create a montage of parts, and once I've crippled you with laughter, you'll be at my mercy. He touched his face, the world's weirdest eyes, nose, mouth, and head shape. His face warped very slightly. For the first time anywhere, the main montage. He finished his act by once again posing in the arabesque position, with his leg bending backwards even above his head. He also formed a heart shape with his arms, touching the top of his head. Nami started, and his lower jaw lowered even lower. A bead of sweat dripped down as Nami continued to stare at him as though he was an idiot. He dropped to his knees, crying as he looked in a mirror he pulled out of somewhere. That was just pathetic. Nami sniped at him, making him flinch. You barely changed anything. Wapple's normal face back on drum looked weirder. How dare you? Mr. 2 gasped, utterly insulted. He paused, also, I don't know who this Wapple is, but poor guy. He deserved it. Mad tyrant, killed all but 21 of the doctors in his entire country. Took 20 of them for himself and never got the last. He was an asshole, honestly. Nami said dismissively, and Mr. 2's eyes popped out. Killing doctors, what manner of fool? Wah, he slapped himself, never mind that. Stop joking, ruined. We're fighting. I am fighting. You're clowning. She shot back, smirking as he got angrier. Then it's truly time for me to stop messing around. Mr. 2 declared, I've never met a single foe who could bring themselves to harm a. Let me stop you right there. Nami said, before raising a finger. First, the only face you've possibly got that I would consider a friend would be Robin's, and she's been beating me up and training enough that I owe her payback anyway. Mr. 2 gasped as she raised a second finger. Second, we regularly beat the shit out of each other on the ship for training, so don't think I won't fight you, even if you somehow snagged a face I'm not expecting. Mr. 2 puckered his lips, then what about this? He touched his face and turned into a very young boy. You wouldn't harm an innocent yawn. Nami flashed forward and kicked him in the face. You heartless wretch. Mr. 2 gasped, holding his bruised and now bloody face. An innocent child. You changing your face doesn't mean shit if you keep the same body, Dumbus. Nami screeched back at him, now utterly done with this fight. Mr. 2 blushed, knew I forgot something. He scratched his chin sheepishly before he kicked up to his feet. Fine then. I can see your heart is 3 sizes too small. He harumphed superiorly. Oh, come off it. Nami rolled her eyes again, no matter how you change your face, you're still you. It'll never work if your opponent knows it's a mask. DSK. Mr. 2 glared at her, fine, I guess we'll just have to do this the hard way. He got into his Kenpo stance again, other than that cutting attack, you have no power. I barely felt that kick. That was a lie. His face was definitely throbbing. But he knew for sure his kicks would hurt her a whole hell of a lot more than her kicks hurt him. Nami glared back, let's get this over with. I have a country to help save. Sorrow. She vanished in a burst of speed, and Mr. 2 coughed out a bit of blood as her foot speared into his gut. Wah. He hacked out as he blew back, impacting another building and demolishing it with his body. Nami landed and had to brace her knee with her hand to keep from falling over. Those 2 Rankyaku had really taken it out of her, but at least it was over and she'd be able to. That was an interesting technique, little swan. Mr. 2's strained voice had her eyes widen in shock. She watched as he stood up, clutching his stomach in pain, but he was grinning fiercely. 10 kicks in a single second. What marvelous speed. GRK. Nami paled and started to sweat, oh shit. Please don't tell me. But Soru. Such an uninspired name, isn't it? He started to twirl, I think a much better name would be Flight of the Swan. He yelled, and then Nami was bent in half around his foot. She flew back so quickly that her body vanished before it impacted a signpost. The metal creaked and broke as she fell to the floor. She coughed raucously, wheezing and barely able to breathe as she arrived on the dusty ground. She rolled onto her knees, her forehead still touching the ground as she cried out in pain, clutching her gut. Tut, tut, you poor thing. He pitied her as he twirled forward. One hit and it looked like she was out, I gave you the chance to turn away, darling. Fuck you. Nami struggled to her feet, her dancer outfit revealing the heavy and already purpling bruise on her stomach. This is nothing. She grimaced, sinking almost to her knees before she staggered her way back up. She spat out some blood, nothing compared to the pain Vivi will feel if you win. She snarled at him, revealing bloody teeth. She bent her knees and vanished, but he mirrored her. The 2 traded places essentially, your bravery is inspiring, little swan. Mr. 2 yelled out as he turned, fine then. I'll show you my ultimate Akama Kenpo technique. He reached behind him and grasped the necks of the 2 swans behind his back. He jumped up, pulled the swan necks off his back, and slapped them onto his feet in one smooth motion, behold. He now was wearing the swan necks and heads on his ballerina slippers, prima ballerina. You look ridiculous. Nami responded, groaning that this was her opponent. How rude. You didn't even let me introduce them. Please be aware the one on your right is a male, and the one on your left is a female. How could you even tell that, Dumbus? Nami screeched at him. Ha ha ha. He laughed, still so rude, little swan. Never mind, I suppose. Take this. Akama Kenpo. Swan, bombardier. Nami relaxed and let Kamii take over, and she was so glad she did. The swan heads were almost mirage-like in their movements, but the beaks were apparently as hard as steel spikes. Even with her dodging them, the beak still opened a very small gash just above her navel and completely pierced through the stone behind her. She wasn't certain even Tekai would have been able to stop it. She used the motion of her dodge to spin and launched a third-rank Kyaku, this time with her left leg. From this close, she couldn't miss. Ah! This time, it was Mr. Two's turn to fall to the ground and writhe as his chest was opened up and began weeping blood. Stop joking, ruined. That hurt. He got to his feet, clutching at his chest. His costume was ripped and torn as well. But Nami grimaced because he wasn't hurt nearly as badly as he should have been. Her injuries and exhaustion had clearly caught up to her. That Rankyaku didn't cut anywhere close to as deeply as it should have. You're so strong, little swan. He grimaced. Right back at you. She huffed, brushing her sweat-matted hair off her face. Those slippers look ridiculous, but they're damn dangerous. You're compressing all of your strength into a tiny point. She glanced at the wall, where a perfectly circular hole was revealed. It's like putting an elephant on top of a stiletto. Ahahaha. You're a smart little lady. That's exactly right. He grinned weakly, just think of my kicks as bullets from a rifle, only a lot bigger. He took a deep breath, I'd say this fight is almost over. One hit from either of us and we're down. Isn't that right, little swan? Nami grimaced, ugh, I'm going to sleep for a week after this. Hahaha. That's if you win, little swan. He started to twirl, though his movements were slower than before, otherwise that sleep will be a good deal longer. The two vanished, and the street started getting utterly destroyed. Cracked pavement here. Then a dozen holes pierced through a wall there. Then a shop cut cleanly into two, with the upper part of the building leaping up 3 feet before crashing down on its still standing walls and crushing them from the impact. Each time, the two appeared and then disappeared in bursts of insane speed. Finally, something gave. Nami crashed to the ground, screaming from the pain of a third-rank Kyaku from her right leg. Her muscles were nearly shredded from it. She was on her hands and knees, clutching her right thigh and behind her knee. Mr. Two landed, also grimacing, wooey, that's killer on the legs, little swan. He bent over and massaged his calves, grimacing, flight of the swan might be an amazing technique, but I definitely will need to train more. He pirouetted some more, it was an amazing fight, little swan. I'll remember you always. He leapt forward, Akama Kenpo. Swan, bombardier. His foot shot forward, aiming to pierce clean through her heart and give her a clean quick end. But Nami had one last trick up her sleeve. Or rather, up her dress. She dodged to the right, lifting her left arm and allowing the swan to just barely graze the side of her ribs. The swan pierced through the ground next to her and then she clapped her arm down and trapped his leg. What? Mr. Two gasped, let go. He tried to pull back, but she had his leg locked down tight. Sorry Mr. Two. Nami said, before she jabbed the last, unbroken section of her clean attack directly into his nethers. Aee. Mr. Two squealed out from the pain of the impact. And then Nami pressed a button and he lit up like a Christmas tree. His skeleton flashed from the electrical discharge and then it was over. His body was smoking heavily as he took 2 steps back and fell, right on his back, defeated. Nami rasped, her clean attack falling from her limp fingers. It clattered on the dusty floor before Nami's vision went dark and she slumped forward. She hit the ground just as hard as her opponent, out cold. Damn it. Vivi cried out in frustration, where could this damn thing be? They had both armies scouring the city. Well, those that could be spared from the evacuation, at any rate. Report. She barked as a couple of the rebels neared her. Princess, the eastern quadrant is clear. The former freedom fighter saluted her. As is the northern quadrant. A royal guard spoke next. Maybe it's not a cannon. Maybe Crocodile just planted the damn thing in a basement somewhere. She mused, with Miss Merry Christmas's mole powers, they could have placed it anywhere. It doesn't need to be shot if it has a 3-kilometer radius. Crocodile couldn't know exactly where we would be fighting. Kamza shook his head, still marveling over what he had repeatedly seen his old roughhousing partner do. She had been practically running up walls and getting atop the tallest of their buildings to check from the roofs. He might have known where we were coming from, but he couldn't know that we would stay in the southern region. His goal is to wipe both armies out, isn't it? Yes, but he wouldn't need to wipe us out. If there were too many survivors, he could just kill the rest himself. Vivi countered, he obviously doesn't care about the palace. She jerked her head to the west, where the massive sandstorm was lit up with brilliant light. Molten jets of glass jetted out and splattered all around every once in a while. Princess. Another royal guard ran to them, southern quadrant is clear and we did break into buildings to check basements. There's nothing. Damn it. Vivi slammed her fist into a wall in complete and utter frustration. Where could a set damn 3-kilometer blast radius bomb be? It can't be small. We don't even know how long we have left. It could go off any minute. She wished she had just had more time. Time enough to manage Geppen consistently. Time to train with her friends more. Are there any areas that are heavily defended by Baroque works? Kamza barked at his freedom fighters and the royal guards alike. Any place that we seem to lose people if we approach. The sniper, you think? Vivi cottoned on immediately. Well, she asked, excitedly. No princess, Kamza. The rebel said, since we weeded out the scum, we haven't lost anyone. Or at least none I've been informed of. The guard agreed. Kamza and Vivi both deflated instantly. Damn it. There must be something we could do. Kamza mimicked his old friend by punching the wall they stood next to. We're the Sunasuna clan, damn it. Surely we know our way around our city. He stopped, stuttering for a minute. Vivi and Kamza snapped their gazes to one another before they both turned to look in the same direction. The clock tower, where they had once made their secret hideout. That son of a bitch. Vivi said blandly, making Kamza choke and several people sputter. She bent her knees and kicked off, throwing herself into the air. She couldn't get them perfectly yet, but she could certainly kick off of the buildings. Vivi, wait. Kamza yelled, but Vivi was speeding away, far outstripping their ability to even remotely keep up. Damn it. To the clock tower. On the double. Vivi was hurrying as fast as she could to the clock tower, but her burgeoning senses told her something was wrong. She kicked off the building directly sideways, and not a moment too soon. As she moved, a bullet sliced through some strands of her hair. Snipers. She yelled, throwing herself through the window. Mr. 7 and Miss Father's Day. She growled as she took a moment's break, panting. She looked around, grabbing the bed sheets and crumpling them before tossing them out the window. The second the bundle left the window, it was expertly pierced by a bullet. They're as good as ever. She groaned, but I can't let that stop me. I have to get to that bomb. She looked around and smiled as spotted a small stand mirror used for makeup. She grabbed it, trusting her senses, and thrust it out of the window. There was another sharp retort of a bullet, but a flare-up of light from Luffy's fight hit the mirror and reflected. Vivi threw herself out the window as soon as she heard a faint cry of pain, and the bullet missed entirely. Oh, thank you Kenban Shoku. I'll never talk bad about you again. Not that she ever had, but now she definitely wouldn't. If only she could actually control it instead of just flying by the seat of her instinct's pants. She could have used it to find these two idiots minutes ago. She continued to race towards the building and did not stop once she reached it. She knew that there was an entrance to the actual tower on the other side of the building, but she didn't know if she had time for that. Instead, she simply ran up the side of the building using Soru. She quickly shot past the ledge and continued into the air until she was at the apex of her leap, floating momentarily in line with the clock face. And then she thrust her legs back and utilized a single Geppen that honestly had her legs screaming in pain. She shot forwards and kicked through the clock face, sending shards of their monument flying everywhere. She did it. Kamza yelled, far away as the rest of the charging men sped up. In the clock tower itself, Vivi's dynamic entry had thrown one of the metal clock hands directly into Mr. 7's forehead, splitting it open and causing blood to gush out as he was knocked unconscious. Mr. 7. Miss Father's Day screamed as her partner was instantly taken out. Damn you, traitor, Kiro. The frog-themed woman croaked in anger as she turned her equally froggy gun at Vivi. Die, Miss Wednesday. Vivi blurred with a Soru and kicked her hard in the chest, sending her flying out of the tower. My name is Vivi. She growled before turning to the lit fuse, cutting the lit portion off with her Kujik Plus lashers. She fell to her knees in relief, letting out a sigh. We did it. She whispered, closing her eyes and allowing herself to feel some of the exhaustion she was fighting. Dick. Hawk. Dick. Hawk. Dick. Hawk. That wasn't the clock tower. The ticking, especially inside the tower, was much louder due to the large and heavy gears and equipment. She could only hear this fainter ticking because the tower's clock was currently inactive. Red rising, she quickly stood and ran inside the absolutely massive cannon. The bore made a regular bombard look positively tiny. Oh, you bastard. She whispered, biting her lip as she looked at the timer on the equally massive bomb. Her fists clenched at her sides and trembled in fury. They had less than 2 minutes left. Who the hell is this brat? Crocodile had never experienced anywhere close to the amount of stress he was currently feeling, not even from his fight with Whitebeard. The giant man had been so far ahead of him that it almost wasn't even a fight. Nothing Crocodile had done had even come close to scratching him, and the strongest man in the world had almost negligently defeated him. Luffy was a whole different beast. Crocodile's Kenban Shoku had never been the greatest, and right now it was being sorely tested. Luffy was blindingly fast, and as Crocodile was finding out, knowing something was coming didn't mean anything if you weren't fast enough to get out of the way. He'd taken over a dozen hits in just a minute's worth of fighting. And his powers. His powers. The other man in a straw hat just had to get a finger on him and he would burn. And had done so multiple times already. Crocodile's hockey had never been pushed so far in either respect. His clothes were even more tattered. It was only through Busumshoku hardening that he hadn't already been killed. He had lost one of his boots and it was only his hockey that kept the foot from being lost with it. Even then, it was lobster red and blistering. Enough. He roared, turning into another sandstorm to try to blast Luffy away. Shishishi. And the most infuriating part. Luffy was having a blast. His smile hadn't dropped from his face once since he had originally discovered his devil fruits rock paper scissors style domination of crocodiles, even when Crocodile successfully hit him with anything. This was the most fun he'd ever had in a fight so far, since his grandpa could beat his ass as easily as Whitebeard could beat crocodiles. "Hey, what's the big deal, banana boy?" Luffy asked, which confused his opponent. What the hell was he on about with that nickname? It's no fun if you just hide. How am I losing to this utter buffoon? A vein was pulsing angrily on Crocodile's temple as he surrounded Luffy in a sandy tornado. Alyabarna's palace had slowly been getting wrecked over the past several minutes. Even beyond the initial eruption of sand from when Crocodile had been chasing Nami, Vivi, and the two guards, the sandstorms had completely stripped away the paint from some of the faces of the once beautiful palace. The grounds were dried and cracked, with Crocodile having absorbed all of their moisture and ground them into more sand. The trees were desiccated husks now. And that wasn't even counting the damage Luffy was doing. His devil fruit left glassed craters and crevices carved deep into the stone plinth the palace sat on. The surrounding areas didn't look much better, with nearby buildings having been buried in sand raining from above. Others still had been carved up from Luffy's attacks, with several now burning from the heat from his attacks. Luffy leapt up the shaft of the tornado of sand surrounding him, before tucking into a ball, pulling his knees up and crossing his arms, Enten no Asahi. He expanded rapidly into a miniature sun, melting the sand all around him. Crocodile panicked as he was part of the sandstorm and he threw himself from it as fast as he could. His body coalesced rapidly and he flew down, smashing into the palace and cracking another wall as he exploded into sand before reforming again. Ah! Crocodile threw his arm in front of his face as the blinding light tried to sear his eyeballs off. His Kenbenshoku screamed at him and he dodged out of the way not a moment too soon. Luffy's blazing fist crashed into the ground where he had been sitting. The ground rapidly heated up and exploded in a burst of steam before magma started spewing about from the melting sandstone. I can't keep doing this. Crocodile thought to himself rapidly, I have to kill him. Otherwise, this heat is going to kill me first. He got to his feet and aimed for Luffy, Desert Spada Adamantina. A sandy blade rose on his arm, the sand turning black from his hockey coating it. He swung his arm, and his blackened sands raced to Luffy, slicing through anything in their path with extreme grinding action. Luffy dodged it, but Crocodile just kept swinging the blade, more and more of the sand surrounding them crawling up his arms to be fired off at his opponent. Desert Spada Adamantina. Bombardio. Luffy made quick agile work of dodging the blades, knowing now that the black coating meant Crocodile was using Gramps' trick, which meant he definitely could get hit. But Crocodile had a plan. He wasn't actually trying very hard to hit Luffy. The straw-hatted brat was too fast. But he had a plan for that. His bare foot had sunk into the sands below, which was not a pleasant feeling from how burned it was. In fact, if Crocodile still had a cigar, he'd probably be biting through it from the pain. But it was doing its job. Oh, shit. Luffy cried out as a snake of sand erupted from underneath him and bit him in the ankle, followed by another. Straw Hat. Crocodile used another Desert Spada Adamantina to finish the job, aiming to cut Luffy's torso in half diagonally. That guy. Luffy crossed his arms and steeled himself. Graw. He cried out in pain as the sands ground against his defense, flaying skin away. No. Crocodile readied another attack as he realized the first one wasn't going to do it, even with his Busumshoku. He swiped his arm again, but Luffy was prepared this time. Enten no Kizu. Luffy ripped his leg from the sand and launched a crescent moon-shaped blade of his solar energy at the approaching sands. The two smashed together between the two opponents, and globs of molten sand rained around them again. The two glared at one another, Crocodile's hair falling into his face. Luffy's arms and parts of his torso were raw and red from having the flesh abraded away. He didn't quite have muscle showing, but he was definitely starting to bleed. TSK. Crocodile clicked his teeth, Sable's Pasado. He yelled, leaping into the air and throwing down an absolutely massive sandstorm. One that was far bigger than the previous ones. This was aiming for Alabasta itself. You already tried that, you stupid banana. Luffy yelled, leaping into the air and once again using Enten no Asahi. The blazing heat disrupted the winds and melted the sands, which rained all over Alyabarna again. Their fight was going to end up destroying the capital even without Crocodile's bomb at this rate. Already, fires were starting to burn as roofs and clothes caught fire down below from the heat of the melting sands. "I know I did." Crocodile yelled, skating towards Luffy with his one good eye closed and shielded by his hand. His other arm, however, was poised to strike. His golden hook didn't look very golden anymore, with the sheath removed. Now it looked silvery, but was full of holes and coated liberally in a purple liquid. He swiped for Luffy's head, but Luffy ducked under it, throwing a glowing thunderous cross into Crocodile's chest. Just before impact, the area blackened. Crocodile was knocked away, rather than being punched clean through. Even then, spittle mixed with blood burst from his mouth as several ribs broke and the skin blistered from the heat. The whirlwind of sand erupted around them again, and Luffy rolled his eyes. This a guy he shut up and dodged left as a fist flew by his head. "Oh, that's much better, shishishi." He grinned as he again dodged a foot and then the hook and then another foot. The sands whirled around them, building up more and more sand from Crocodile's loja fruit. Trails of sand even hit Luffy, but much to Crocodile's frustration, he wasn't getting dried out. His desiccation powers were definitely touching the brat, but they didn't seem to be working. "Dessert granola." Crocodile yelled, an utterly massive and heavy tsunami of sand surging before crashing down towards Luffy. Luffy leapt up, trying to get above the crashing wave, but his eyes widened as the tornado of sand was contracting too. Crap. Tech eye. He gritted his teeth and covered his nose and mouth as he was smashed between the two waves of sand. Desert SMSM. Crocodile roared as Luffy was engulfed and started compacting the sands as much as he possibly could. He wanted to crush the life out of this pest who had interfered in so many of his plans. He wanted to squeeze every drop of blood he could out of him. But he wasn't going to get his wish. He could feel the sands making no progress. In fact, he could feel Luffy fighting his way out, the mountain of sand rippling and surging with every move the other loja made. A plume of molten glass erupted from one of the sides, and Crocodile knew he had to make this count. He launched himself forward at Luffy, weakening the prison just enough on one of the sides. Sure enough, Luffy burst from it, gasping for breath while trying to spit the sands from his mouth. "Die, Straw Hat." Crocodile swiped, stabbing Luffy directly in the side with his blackened hook, right through his tech eye. Grinning in victory, Crocodile opened his mouth to gloat. And then he realized. He had fucked up. Luffy's crushing grip landed on his wrist, preventing him from pulling his arm away. Luffy had his own shit-eating grin on his face as he turned his arm into the sun and squeezed. "Aya." Crocodile rolled away, howling and clutching his once again mutilated limb. The pain was the worst he had ever felt. His original injury had been a clean cut for all the pain it had caused him. This time, it was not only burned and cauterized, which was sending screaming pain racing up his limb, but Luffy had squeezed it off like popping a pimple. His fingers had dug into different parts of Crocodile's arm, so it was anything but a clean cut. No, it was a jagged mess, which was blackening from the burns this time, not hockey. The only saving grace was that it wasn't his good hand that Luffy had literally squeezed off. The pain was so bad that one of Crocodile's teeth cracked and popped off from how hard he was squeezing his jaw. Finally, he rolled onto his knees in one hand, growling in rage at his slumped-over opponent. There was a small puddle of blood in front of Luffy, coming both from the wound itself and having been spat out by the younger loja. He had yanked the hook out of his wound and was now holding it and the burning bits of Crocodile's arm. "You." Crocodile snarled, "Every single one of your friends are going to die screaming for that." Shishishi. Luffy laughed, though it was strained. He raised his head, greeting Crocodile with bloody teeth. "Why are you talking like you won, stupid? It's just a tiny stab." He eyed the small hook with a tilt of his head. It was Crocodile's turn to laugh, though it was far more strained than Luffy's. "Because I have, imbecile." He stood and started to laugh harder. That was scorpion poison. The deadliest in any desert across the entire world. "You're dead, Straw Hat." Shishishi, and Luffy laughed, which wiped the smile off Crocodile's face. "You don't get it, do you? I'm a loja too. I told you that earlier." Luffy's grin widened as Crocodile's face paled. He was well aware of that fact, but didn't think it would have any bonuses that his brat of an opponent was no doubt about to inform him of. "You have that special little drying power of yours, but I've got some tricks too. I'm the sun. I don't feel heat. Cold doesn't bother me at all either." Crocodile clenched his fist as Luffy continued to speak, his grin getting even wider, "And any poison or virus immediately gets destroyed inside me." Fun fact. He had also been bitten by Kesha, the same as Vivi. None of them ever knew, nor would they. Luffy reached up and pulled his eyelid down, sticking his tongue out. "How about that, imbecile?" He purposefully mocked Crocodile's pronunciation of the word. "Ahahaha." Crocodile snapped, "What the fuck are you laughing about? You think you won just because you destroyed my hook? Oh, is this where you tell me about your bomb?" Luffy asked, and Crocodile bit his tongue in pure shock. Yeah, Robin found out about that too. He grinned, punching his fist into his open palm and squeezing to crack his knuckles. By now, they'll have found it and stopped your idiots from firing it. He switched hands to crack his other set, which means all that's left to do is finish kicking your ass so we can get to the victory feast. There won't be a fucking victory feast. Crocodile spat before he grinned himself. After all, I planned for everything. Luffy's smile dropped. You think stopping the cannon is enough? Oh no, Straw Hat. That bomb is on a timer. Even I can't stop it now. Luffy lost his smile and started to glare. For the first time since the very start of the fight, every person in the city except you and me are going to die in about a minute. Including your friends and your bitch of a princess. Let's see how much you laugh then. Luffy bent his knees and threw himself forward, pure fury on his face. Crocodile did the same, and this time, he was the one laughing. What am I going to do? Vivi held her head in her hands as the numbness of her discovery vanished and panic started to set in. Despite how hard she was wishing it wasn't true, the bomb wasn't magically disappearing. The timer was ticking ever onward, mockingly. Vivi had already ascertained that she could lift it. Barely, but she could. Nami would probably have been able to put it on her back and maybe even shuffle it away. Luffy could probably have just thrown the damn thing away. She couldn't do any of that. She had barely been able to lift it. Even if Kamza and the former rebels and guards burst into the tower right now, they probably wouldn't be much help either. Training on the Straw Hat ship had given her perspective she'd always lacked in terms of strength. She was probably stronger than most of the muscle-bound royal soldiers. Even if they managed to somehow get it out of the cannon, there was no way they would be able to carry it out of the city fast enough to make a difference. Even if they sprinted at full speed, without Soru they couldn't even get from the clock tower to a safe distance unencumbered, much less carrying the bomb. There simply wasn't enough time. Just the time she'd spent trying and failing to get it out of the cannon had burned about half of the time available. There were only 50 seconds left. She was on her own. She was the only one who could stop this. And if she failed, they all were dead. Every man, woman, and child still in Alubarna except for Luffy, and that bastard Crocodile would disappear in hellfire. She needed to do something, and now. The only good thing was that she'd jostled it a fair bit and it hadn't gone off. It looked as if the detonator really was the only way it could go off. It made sense. If it was so sensitive that impacts could set it off, Alubarna probably would have been destroyed when Crocodile didn't want it to. As long as she didn't damage the detonator, she was probably fine. It wasn't in her way at least. She'd managed to turn it away from her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself and clenching her leg muscles. She knew the theory. All the Straw Hats had been shown every move of the Rakushiki. She had never managed one, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She knew even if she did manage to succeed, it was going to put her out of commission. So, if this didn't work, then she had played all of her cards. With a grunt of exertion, she raised her leg to the ceiling in front of her before bringing it down in an axe kick. Renkyaku. She yelled as the air churned in front of her. A gust erupted from her and struck the bomb, rocking it back. But it just settled, sitting there mockingly. 30 seconds. Vivi groaned in pain as she massaged her calf, hunched over. That's even worse than Gepm. She cried out, damn it, it can't end like this. She straightened up and ignored the pain in her leg. Pain was temporary. She could deal with pain. She steeled herself again, Renkyaku. This time she appeared to get an actual blade of wind and yet it just stopped on the face of the bomb, barely nicking it. As she put weight on her leg, she wobbled and fell over. GHH. She hissed through gritted teeth, tears in her eyes. 20 seconds. Damn it. She punched the inner barrel of the cannon. Damn it. Damn you, Crocodile. She screamed in fury as she punched again and again until her knuckles were gashed and bloody. I won't let it end like this. She forced herself to her feet, hissing in agony as her leg throbbed. I won't let it. She threw her leg up one last time, Renkyaku. She screamed as a final blade of wind left her heel. The attack struck the bomb in front of her as her world went white. Vivi didn't even realize what had happened because the next thing she knew, she was hearing screams. And then she realized it was her screaming. Her leg was limp and she could see ugly purple bruising already starting to form from calf to thigh. But beyond that, all she could do besides cry in agony was feel relief. She managed to roll herself to face the bomb, or rather, what was left of it. Her Renkyaku had cut it in half straight down the middle before cutting through the back of the cannon as well and even continuing out the back of the clock tower. The back of the cannon had fallen apart and the bomb had rolled out. As soon as it crashed down to the floor of the clock tower, the two hemispheres had split open, spilling the white powdered high explosives Crocodile had purchased everywhere. The two hemispheres had continued rolling until they hit the wall and then fell over on their sides. Even through her pain, Vivi managed a wet laugh as the timer hit 0 and there was a click. But with nothing to ignite, it just fizzled out. It was music to her ears. Vivi. Vivi, where are you? Kamza's voice pierced the air as a door was slammed open. By Ra's light, what happened here? He gasped. I'm here. She managed to gasp out. Footsteps stomped, and Kamza turned pasty as he lay eyes on her. Vivi, your leg. He gasped in horror as he kneeled down next to her, afraid to even touch her. Princess. The rebels and guards with him gasped in horror as they saw her too. She let out a pained chuckle. Yeah, not very pretty. She said. Indeed, her entire leg had already started turning purple from all the blood vessels and muscle she tore. Doesn't hurt much right now. She said in faux cheer, knowing exactly what that meant. That's because you're in shock, you idiot. Kamza snapped, what are you standing there for? Get a stretcher. The guards snapped to follow their orders, even if they had to find stuff to make a makeshift one. Osiris help me, why didn't you wait for us, Vivi? If I had, we'd all be dead. Vivi was starting to feel more than a little lightheaded. She pointed at the left side of the bomb, look for yourself. Kamza turned his head and then he paled, a timer, it was going to go off even if we stopped the firing. Yeah, she tried to sit up, but a lance of pain shot through her and she abandoned that immediately with a short yelp. Don't move, damn it. Kamza snapped at her. Yeah, I got that. Vivi whimpered. Damn it, this is all my Kamza started to say, bowing his head over her. She immediately dope slapped him, don't be a moron. She said, letting her hand fall. She probably would have found his expression funny if she had bothered looking, there's only one person to blame. She managed to raise her head and look through the slice her Rankyaku had carved in the clock tower, and I'm looking at him. She glared hatefully at the tornado of sand spinning above her childhood home. Luffy's glowing fist struck Crocodile hard, knocking out a few teeth, even with the Busmshoku coating that Crocodile raised to protect himself. Crocodile reeled before his form rippled with sand and he jerked forward, slamming another desert spada adamantina into Luffy's chest in retaliation. Luffy used Tech Eye to protect himself and then kicked Crocodile in the chest, forcing the air from his lungs. Crocodile skidded to a stop and already had his hand on the ground, Seiko. The ground started to dry up even more than normal and Crocodile forced sand into it to start grinding it up, ground Muerde. He roared and the ground beneath him cracked as though an earthquake had ripped through it. Faults opened up and slabs of rock jostled from the quake before it all turned into sand. Why keep fighting, Straw Hat? Crocodile's laugh came from the waterfalls of sand that had engulfed him. Even if you survive and beat me by some miracle, all your friends will be gone. You stupid dreamers will never survive on the Grand Line. Enten no men. Luffy formed a massive sphere of plasma in his hands, pumping more and more of his power into it before throwing it forward. He didn't really have time to think about it right now, but later he would feel bad about just how messed up Vivi's house was getting. Crocodile and he had utterly ruined it already. The interior was full of sand, the outdoor area had been dried up, the plants killed, and parts of the plateau turned to sand. Parts of the palace itself were gouged up, as were parts of the grounds. Blackened holes and craters pockmarked the entire ancient edifice. And it was about to get a whole lot worse. Luffy's attack flew forward, piercing through the rivers of sand and expanding rapidly. Another sun burst into being atop the plateau and kept growing. The sand was engulfed, melting, and even starting to boil. It rained down as molten glass all over. The ball stopped expanding, but it had already consumed a section of the palace itself. It imploded, shrinking to a single point before evaporating. But it had already done its work. Everything it had touched was just gone. A semicircle had been melted into the ground and had even carved away parts of the palace. The extreme heat had already started to catch things on fire. If they didn't end this fight soon, they were going to turn the capital of Vivi's home into an unlivable hellscape. Crocodile reformed, his shirt completely gone, exposing his muscular chest. His entire body was covered in a patchwork of burns and he was starting to flag. The arm which formerly held his hook was almost completely gone now, with a blackened stump all that remained near his shoulder. He trembled in agony, his remaining eye red and veiny, and all of the momentary amusement he'd found gone. Luffy chuckled, hahaha, what's wrong, banana? Despite all of his wounds, despite the fact that his flesh had been flayed and rubbed right down to the muscle, despite the fact that he was visibly as exhausted as Crocodile himself, his grin only got wider. Where's that bomb you were so proud of? It's been more than a minute, hasn't it? Crocodile ground his teeth together before turning to look at the clock tower. Even from here, Crocodile could see the white powder of the explosive he had purchased slowly dribbling out from the newly gashed clock tower. It looked as if someone had sliced it with a knife. And that was when Crocodile knew. It was over. Luffy followed his gaze and his face lit up, ahaha, looks like they did it. Looks like your trap failed, banana. Crocodile looked broken as the realization ripped through him. Every single one of his plans had been countered and stopped. He'd failed to end the threat beneath rain dinners with his drowning trap. He had underestimated this entire crew because they came from the weakest of the seas, even though he knew damn well that Roger had come from there too. The one outlier that had ever come from that sea. He had been so confident and sure of his victory. He had planned for every contingency and laid trap after trap, but it hadn't been enough. His overconfidence had cost him an eye and a lot of blood to pests, and underestimating Monkey D. Luffy had been a mistake. He couldn't keep this up. His Kenban Shoku had already failed him, and his stamina was so drained that he was starting to lose control of his Busum-shoku. He was going to lose. He knew it, and the thought was causing him nothing but fury. This no-name pirate captain from East fucking Blue was going to kill him. And even if he managed to kill the younger man by some miracle, he would be so weak after that even Nefertari fucking Vivi could probably finish the job and kill him. All his plans. 16 years of work. All up in smoke and ash because of this moron of a dreamer in front of him. The brat had been won when he first started making plans in Alabasta. And the worst part was that he could see himself in the idiot before him. Before the seas had ripped comrade after comrade from him. Before Whitebeard had crushed his dreams of being the pirate king. Before he had grown disgusted with the romanticism of the pirate lifestyle and resolved to never let anyone else get close to him. This damned rookie was doing what Crocodile had never been able to do. Not even 20 years old, and Monkey D. Luffy was already capable of defeating even a seasoned veteran like Crocodile himself, even when he was going all out. And that, more than anything else, was what pissed him off the most. "I may lose here, Straw Hat." Crocodile roared out, "But I'm taking you with me." And with that, Crocodile pulled every last ounce of energy out of his exhausted body, throwing himself into the air. Every single grain of sand in the entirety of Alubarna and even from the outlying desert started to follow him. The sand started to compact, forming an absolutely massive crocodile in the air, befitting its namesake. Luffy grinned widely as he realized that meant he could break out the big guns without destroying even more of Vivi's home. He cupped his hands, and a massive ball of plasma started forming between them. Yellow light blazed and everything near him started to smolder as the heat ratcheted up again, and to no. "Die, Straw Hat." Crocodile's voice roared from within the sandy crocodile as the entire beast seemed to blacken with hockey. Its head was even bigger than the entire palace and the plateau it sat on. Desert Tasm, the crocodile shot downwards like a falling meteor, its maw wide open and ready to snap Luffy and a large section of Alubarna up in a single bite. "Mentame." Luffy yelled out his own move and threw his hands towards the sky. A brilliant light shot towards the heavens, illuminating the night sky. And then even more power seemed to surge, with the ground beneath Luffy's feet starting to crack and buckle. The beam, which had been started at about 10 meters in diameter, expanded to about 100 meters. The inner core of the beam was so hot that it was actually starting to turn a little blue. It struck the crocodile and the Busum-shoku coating held for roughly a second before the beast started to look like it was sweating. And then it started to melt, losing its form as the hellfire of solar plasma burned it away. The sheer heat turned the attack to glass, and Crocodile inside of it merely closed his eye in defeat for the final time. And then his world went white and he was engulfed. The crocodile in the air was held up by the plasma, not falling and crashing into Alubarna. Luffy kept intensifying it more and more, with more of the beam starting to turn blue. The molten glass started to boil faster and faster before it started to evaporate. Finally, the entire beast was gone, completely erased by Luffy's attack. The beam petered out, revealing the result. The sheer heat rising out of the planet's atmosphere had churned the air and mixing the hot and cold air had started forming clouds which were spreading across Alabasta. A hole in the clouds was rapidly filling with Luffy's attack gone. Without Crocodile's presence and very intentional and insidious use of his powers, as well as the effects of Luffy's final attack, something which hadn't happened naturally in Alabasta in almost a decade was about to occur. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. Rain started to fall, putting out all of the fires. The people of Alabasta across the entire island looked on in rapture as the life-giving liquid started to fall from the heavens. Waves of shame, grief, relief, and joy started to engulf the people of the desert country. Miles away, Robin and Zoro smiled, knowing what must have happened. Further away, Pell landed and allowed King Cobra off his back, with the injured king holding his hand out and sighing peacefully as he watched the storm engulf his nation. He looked to the sky and smiled. Across Alubarna, the various fighters of the Straw Hat smiled, he did it. They cheered and allowed themselves to rest. As Vivi was stretchered out of the clock tower, she held her hand out, feeling the rain fall on her exhausted body. She started to cry, closing her eyes and hiding her mouth behind her hand. "Luffy," she cried out, "thank you. Thank you." In the ruins of the Alubarna palace, Luffy looked at the sky, wavering on his feet. He felt the heavy raindrops falling on him, but they caused no discomfort. They felt welcoming, actually. He smiled, not really hearing, but feeling Vivi's thanks and his crew's cheering. Shishishi. He smiled widely before tilting back and falling flat on his back, unconscious. The fighting. Pell shrieked in elation, it stopped. Our people have stopped fighting. That bright beam probably had something to do with it. Alabasta's King Nefertari Cobra had a wry smile on his face as he stated this. I certainly wouldn't want to fight after gazing upon that. No. Pell shook his head, look, my king. Their weapons are gone too. They're cleaning up. That wouldn't have happened so quickly after that massive attack. The fight's been over for much longer. Then let's hope my face won't stir things up again. Cobra said, his smile dropping, let's find my daughter. Immediately. I must see her. Yes sir. Pell focused his gaze panning around the city before they widened. Without a word, they dove, with Cobra jerking back from the increased speed, his cheeks pulling from the whipping winds. Your Majesty. There were several yelps as they landed, with Cobra hurrying off Pell's back as he transformed back into his human form. Daddy. Vivi's smile could have lit the sky as she teared up, you're alright. She sounded so relieved, trying to keep from letting any more tears fall. My daughter. Cobra said hoarsely as he took in her nearly completely purple leg, oh Vivi, what have they done to you? He took her hand in his, bringing it up to his forehead in as controlled a grip as he could. Vivi shook her head, nothing. She let out a pained chuckle, putting on a brave face, did it to myself. Odds, you've mangled your leg. He reached out to touch it but seemed to think better of it. What did you do? What I had to. Vivi relaxed back on the stretcher, there was a bomb. Cobra's eyes widened, we thought we just had to stop them from firing it, but Crocodile thought of that too. She said bitterly, there was a timer on it. Would have killed us all. She sharpened her gaze, I did what I had to. She repeated herself. Damn it. Pell punched his thigh, I should have. Pell. Vivi's voice was sickly sweet, I'm not the same crybaby little girl you used to take flying for treats. She paused, well, I'd still love to go flying. She smiled as that got several people to laugh, but I'm serious. I gave you orders and you followed them perfectly. Things may have worked out differently with better information, but I wouldn't change a thing. I'll heal. And even if I didn't, I would give up my leg 1,000 times to save 1,000,000 lives. So, stop beating yourself up. That's an order. Pell bowed his head, letting some proud tears fall, yes, princess. Cobra stared at her in surprise, before letting out a small smile, you've grown so much, he squeezed her hand gently, I'm so proud of you. Vivi's face scrunched up and she threw her arm over her eyes, damn it, daddy. I was trying not to cry. Cobra chuckled in bemusement before turning his gaze to Kamza. The blonde man could barely hold his gaze, fidgeting in place. Kamza. Your Majesty. He kneeled, bowing his head, this was all on me. If I hadn't been Anne Vivi dope slapped him. Idiot. She said weakly. Raise your head, Kamza. Cobra said, none of us saw the truth. We all were led about by our noses. You, me, the whole nation. We were all taken in by that charismatic schemer, thinking he had changed his ways. I won't have you chastise yourself for a mistake I could have made in your shoes. Kamza clenched his fists, letting them tremble on the dusty ground as tears prickled in his eyes. We need to address the nation. Cobra said loudly, tell them that the nightmare is over. Only then will we be able to rebuild. We're in luck then, Your Majesty. A royal guard said, carrying a visual den mushi, followed by others carrying broadcasting equipment. We found this equipment in a carriage used by Crocodile. He spat the name, apparently he wished to address the nation once Alubarna was a smoking crater. Cobra clenched his teeth but gave no more signs of how angry he was over the man's duplicity. Then it's time we clear things up. He said, get this equipment over to the palace. We must declare this nightmare over. He turned back to Vivi as the men hurried to follow their orders, you're hurting, Vivi. No one would think ill of you for sitting this out. I'll speak. I know the most. She smiled weakly, I think I'll need to cover this, though. She pointed at her leg, which even now was still throbbing. She grabbed a royal guard, get a crew together and find my friends. She told him, tell them to meet me at the palace, or take them if you have to. They might be injured. We couldn't have done this without them. You too, Pell. You already met Nami-chan. Oh of course, princess, but I have no idea what they look like, the man sounded shaken. Vivi snorted, before quickly describing everyone. But most importantly, she unwrapped her arm, they'll have this mark on them. We needed a way to trick the main Nomi user. She showed off the X on her arm. Luffy will be somewhere on the palace grounds. He was the one who killed Crocodile. Yes, princess. He grabbed a few guards and even some rebels and set off to search for his targets. I will find Nami-san quickly. Pell declared, taking wing. Later, they were all at the plaza, with Kamza looking shaken, gods, is it even safe to enter? Several walls looked bowed out, pillars were cracked, the ground was gouged, everything green and good was withered and dead, at least the sand was gone. Crocodile had taken all of it for his final attack. Leave this to us. Several of the former rebels stepped up, we weren't always freedom fighters. The leader said quietly, all of us were in the engineering guild once upon a time. We'll have the palace evaluated within the hour. In the meantime, Vivi said, now in a wheelchair that had been quickly put together for her. A quilt was draped over her legs, hiding the damage. We're ready, aren't we? Yes. Cobra said, Kamza, get over here. You're speaking too. Kamza jerked before walking over to stand with the king, looking very much like he did not want to be there. 3, 2, 1 The cameraman counted down before turning on the den. All across the country, people stopped what they were doing as projectors turned on. The people working through the smoldering rubble in Nanohana stopped sifting. The Marines and people in Rain Base stopped their bustling, having already rescued everyone from rain dinners. All around, the people watched, some in respect and some in anger as the king of their country appeared on the screen. People of Alabasta. He began his speech with 3 simple words to catch everyone's attention. I come to you today not with words of sadness or anger, but with hope for the future. Across our land, this scene is repeating itself. He held his hand out, with the raindrops pattering on his skin. After years missing, the rain has finally returned to our lands. Today is a day of peace. Of renewal. And I am proud to say, our nightmare is over. He stepped aside, gesturing to Kamza. Unlike the king, he was fidgeting before he took a deep breath. When I formed our rebellion against the crown, I thought I was doing the right thing. All of the evidence we had pointed to the crown stealing all of our hard-earned prosperity for themselves. But despite that, I never wanted to fight. Never wanted this to truly come to civil war. 3 years we've existed, and yet we've never once fought for real. Not until today. Not until Nanohana burned. We had tried again and again to resolve the civil war peacefully, but those events made it impossible. He dropped to his knees again, staring at the ground. I come to you today, not reluctantly victorious, nor bitterly defeated. I come to you shamed for my role in this farce. I come to you wondering how we can ever make up for what we've done. People of Alabasta. He looked straight at the den. We were all deceived. Every act, every bit of evidence against the crown, all of it was fake. All of it was fabricated. We were all led by our noses into a trap, and if it hadn't been for the actions of less than a dozen brave souls, more than 1 million innocent unsuspecting lives would have vanished today. There would have been no victor except the mastermind behind this entire plot. He started to cry, people of Alabasta, I cannot reveal everything that happened. I do not know everything that happened. So, I will give the floor to someone who does. Someone who risked everything to keep us from destroying ourselves. Someone who kept this tragedy from becoming a true nightmare. He stood and walked to the right. All across Alabasta, people gasped as they laid eyes on their princess. Most of them had never actually seen her before, as she had never made such a public appearance. But the whispers of those who had met her immediately started to travel. And they never would have expected their gorgeous princess to be stuck in a wheelchair, nor for her to look so exhausted and disheveled in public. They gave her their undivided attention. But despite that exhaustion, she still smiled in true happiness. For 3 years, I've been stuck in a nightmare. She licked her lips, no, perhaps even longer than that. This started long ago when the rain started to dry up. Sandstorms pounded our cities, crops dried up, and all of our prosperity seemed to vanish. I know what it looked like. Misfortune striking almost every city except our great capital. Dance powder creating fake rain in Elubarna while stealing it from cities elsewhere. Shipments in my father's name. I would have believed it too if I hadn't known my father. Known he would never do such a thing. Known he was a kind, gentle man who would have readily taken on any woe so our people could remain happy and prosperous. She clenched her fists on top of her quilt. I knew the evidence was wrong, and so I had to prove it. With nothing more than my young, super spot-built duck Karu and the captain of the guard Igaram, I left Alabasta in search of answers and went undercover inside a shady organization that Igaram had heard whispers about. Baroque Works was that organization. She held up a small flag, showing the entire country the emblem of Crocodile's secret society. Baroque Works billed itself as a secret society. No one could know each other's names, and no one was allowed to know who the boss was. Everyone was given a code name and forced to perform missions for the good of the organization. She scrunched up the small flag. Anyone who found out about Baroque Works either had to join or die. Anyone who failed a mission had to die. Anyone who discovered the boss's identity, you guessed it, had to die. Mzaa, Cobra, and practically half of the country clenched their fists in rage and despair over what their princess had to endure. That was the living nightmare that I survived for 3 years. I was forced to do things I never wanted to do and never want to do again. But I had to clear my father's name. I had to stop our people from going to war with each other. It was the only path forward. I was diligent. I rose through the ranks. And finally, I had my answer. She took a deep breath. The leader of Baroque Works was someone we all knew too well. This bastard put on a show for all of us, acting like he was a good man. That he had reformed. All the while cackling to himself in private over the people he was playing for fools. Her voice raised in volume with every word, and now she was yelling, that person was this country's hero. Sir Crocodile of the Royal Shichibukai. All across the country, yelling began as rage and disbelief warred. The Marines still in the country all looked very chagrined and pale at her words. Vivi allowed a few moments before raising a hand for silence. He did everything right. Everything that someone who wanted nothing more than to gain our trust would do. He built a bright and prosperous city, inviting everyone who wished to live there in peace. He defeated pirate crew after pirate crew. He brought wealth to the land and safety to our shores. And most damning of all, he brought back our national treasure. For the first time in hundreds of years, the Suna Nami was back in Alabasta's hands. We thought he was a better man. That he truly was our savior. Our protector. And the entire time, he was working to destroy us. He used our devil fruit to dry the skies of moisture. He pounded city after city with sandstorms until they were buried and unlivable. He had his stooges go around with illegal dance powder to make my father look like a villain. He recruited powerful assassins, useful devil fruit users, and complete morons who thought a grand payday was waiting for them to foment unrest in our nation. She accepted a glass of water from her father, taking a gulp and handing it back, over a decade of planning all leading up to this day. Vivi said softly, nearly a day ago, the people of Nanohana saw King Nefertari Cobra and a group of royal guards shoot innocent civilians. They saw the king start an uncontrollable fire in the city. They saw my father declare that he stole the rain and that he would sacrifice Nanohana to make up for it. She looked to her left and waved. A small child came into view, crying, I was one of the people in Nanohana. He trembled, I was so angry. Like others, I thought the king had stolen the rain. I confronted him and he kicked me in the face before ordering the guards to start shooting and burning. He shuddered, a ship crashed into the harbor. A ship with thousands of guns and other weapons. While everyone else was rushing to put out the fires and arm themselves, I found myself so shaken I couldn't even speak. He started to cry because in the confusion, I saw the king take off his face. It had been an impostor the entire time. He started to wail. Everyone was fooled and I was so scared I couldn't stop anyone from fighting. Vivi patted him on the shoulder before giving him a gentle hug, you did great. She whispered to him and Igaram gently led the boy away. She bit her lip, my father had already been missing for 3 weeks. She declared, one of their top agents was the user of the main Nami. Anyone whose face he touched, he would be able to perfectly copy. He stole my father's face years ago and he used it time and again to make my father look suspicious. Also that more and more of our people would join the rebellion. And not only that, but if there ever looked like there was a chance for peace, the Baroque Works members infiltrating both the army and the rebellion would be there to incite violence once more. For over a decade, Crocodile has been coating us in gunpowder and yesterday he lit the fuse. The rebel army, now massive and bloated and carrying enough weapons to take down a country, rushed for Alubarna and my father's head. But for what? She asked, looking away from the camera for a moment. Why do what he did? Why bother with the elaborate scheme? She asked again, well, that was for his final trick. She said grimly, 1,000,000 people. All of our nation's fighting force. All of the people capable of defending us from attack. 1,000,000 people gathered in a single place. In Alubarna. In our capital, with all of the city's civilians with them. She said softly, millions of people in the blast radius of a bomb capable of turning it all to ash. All of our people. All of his patsies. All gone in one massive fireball. The entire country stood still. If it wasn't for the rain, you could have heard a pin drop from any corner of the island. Several people looked sick and others had dropped to their knees in devastation. Everyone realized where Vivi was going with this. She smiled grimly, confirming what they all thought, and in the end, who would be the concerned citizen here to pick up the pieces? Who would be here to defend us? Who would be here to console a country in mourning? The sick bastard who caused all of it in the first place. All across the country, millions of people lost their lunches. Millions of people cried out in sorrow. Millions of people thanked their lucky stars that clearly, something had happened to put a stop to it. I couldn't have done it on my own. Vivi said softly, I would have sacrificed anything to keep it from happening, but I couldn't stop it on my own. If it hadn't been for the dear friends I met on the final legs of my journey, everything would have been for naught. They fought for us. Fought for me. And taught me to fight for myself. If it hadn't been for them, I wouldn't be here right now. She started to stand. Vivi, what? Kamza started to try to force her back down, but Vivi casually put a hand on his chest and gently pushed him away. She finished standing and the quilt dropped, revealing her completely purple leg to the country. Her face was warped in agony, but she forced herself to keep standing, even as she trembled in place. My friends all had opponents to fight. Baroque Works had too many members. Not a single one of us could be spared. Her voice shook as she finally gave it up and sat back down. Her father hurried to cover her legs again and she held his hand tightly and that meant the bomb had to be stopped while the fighting was still ongoing. If I hadn't trained with them, if they hadn't made me stronger than I was when I left, I wouldn't have been able to get our people to stop fighting. I wouldn't have been able to keep the saboteurs from ruining the peace I managed to force out of the two armies. And I certainly would not have been able to destroy the bomb and my leg with it. She smiled in exhaustion. I can't tell you who they are, but I can tell you this. They are our heroes. Without them, none of us would be here right now. Without them, Crocodile would have had everything he wanted. Her smile sharpened, but they were here. And because of it, I am happy to announce that Sir Crocodile is dead. He will never be able to harm us again. She let the microphone fall, nearly falling asleep as all of her remaining strength faded. Cobra gently took it from her white-knuckle grip before whispering to Igaram to get her to the infirmary. I hardly recognize her. He smiled sadly, because of that government dog's machinations, I lost 3 years with my wonderful daughter. He told the people. He turned from Vivi and looked at the camera. Mza couldn't do the same, staring at his feet as tears dribbled from his eyes. We all have regrets. Cobra said, that's only natural. And it's even more natural for us to feel sorrowful. We've suffered terrible losses for no reason and gained nothing in return. Mza flinched, Your Majesty. But we must now move forward and look to the future. We must all strive as best we can to put this tragedy and these dark years behind us. He then bellowed, it's impossible to undo the past. Now, we must look to the future. We must overcome this war's tragedies and live. He took a deep breath, long live Alabasta. Without Crocodile's power artificially affecting the island's climate, rain fell for many days in the desert kingdom. Nature was trying to heal from the damage inflicted on the nation so that things could return to normal. For the Straw Hats, things took a little while to catch up. Most of them were injured and all of them were exhausted. Chopper was the first one to wake. As his own, he naturally healed faster than normal, even if his was the Hito Hito no Mi. He was a reindeer, so he was hardier to start with. And predictably, he also had the funniest reaction. Wah! His eyes popped out of his skull as he laid eyes on Vivi, laid up in the infirmary with the rest of them. Your leg. Doctor. We need a doctor. I think that's you, Chopper. Robin jerked awake, chuckling as she sat up despite the rude awakening. Of the Straw Hats, she was the least tired. Her fight with Hina had been tough but relatively fast and ended easily once she found the Pinkette's weakness. She was tired for different reasons and a lot of it had to do with the sheer amount of traveling she and Zoro had to do to even get to Elyabarna. She didn't think her legs had ever gotten such a workout and she'd even needed to suffer the indignity of Zoro carrying her part of the way back once he started breathing normally again. Oh, right. Chopper stopped panicking, which got a dry laugh from Vivi and the watching king. Excitable little Tanuki, isn't he? Cobra asked his daughter with a grin. Baka. I'm a reindeer. Chopper roared at him before smacking himself, just stay still, Vivi. I'll get you some medicine fast. Nuo, I think I'll go stand and do some squats, Chopper. Vivi rolled her eyes in fond amusement. Don't you dare. The sarcasm went right over his head, getting another laugh from Cobra. Little did the king know, Chopper had dealt with idiots that would start working out even in Vivi's condition on a regular basis. He pointed his hoof at the very old man who had been taking care of them. You, show me all of your herbs and compounds. Ah. The doctor jumped a little at being addressed, right this way. He led Chopper away and then watched in awe as the little reindeer turned into a whirlwind of medicinal knowledge, quickly grabbing various vials, stored plants, and a mortar and pestle. My word. What an ingenious combination. I've never considered such a thing, but it's so logical. Chopper twitched, where did you learn medicine? Vivi giggled as Chopper didn't really respond, shocked, Tony-kun is from Drum Island. He trained under their best doctor for years. She smiled, he cured me of a Kestia bite like that. She snapped her fingers. Kestia, my word, how were you possibly exposed to that thing? The doctor yelped, we could have done nothing for you if it happened here. Drum Island truly must be a great land of medicine. I never knew techniques like this existed despite my 40 years of practice. Shut up. Quit gawking at me, fool. Go away, asshole. Chopper had a wide smile on his face as he worked, despite his words. Cobra laughed, quite a group you fell in with, Vivi. Vivi smiled back before turning to the doctor, I think that means, please sit and share some tea with me while you watch me work, doctor. Ah, quite. The doctor sat in the chair Chopper was pulling out for him. I have to get back to work. Cobra pecked his daughter on the forehead, I'll leave you in their capable hands. Robin stretched as she got out of bed, need a hand, Chopper. She waved her arm, which separated into 3 different ones, all pointing in a different direction. The doctor jumped in shock, not having expected the devil fruit. Here. Chopper handed her a large bowl filled with one of the compounds he had made, spread this all over Vivi's leg. It will help with the swelling, bruising, and pain. He turned to Vivi, the application will hurt a bit, Vivi. Just bear with it. And be worse than doing it in the first place. Vivi said bravely, and none of them commented on her not having any adrenaline to mask it. Robin brought the bowl over to Vivi, biting her lip a bit as she saw the angry purple bruising. My word Vivi, what did you do? Benkyaku. Vivi sighed, I wasn't ready for it. But if I hadn't, Crocodile would have won. The bomb was on a timer. Robin sighed, sorry I couldn't give you better information. She said softly, slathering her leg up as gently as she could. The bruising went nearly all the way up, which meant she had to get quite close to the younger girl's privates. But neither of them paid it any mind. Despite her brave face, it was clear that even the gentle rubbing was incredibly painful. At least you didn't break anything. Vivi giggled weakly, yeah, at least there's that. Gradually, the crew started waking up. Zoro was next, and he was quick to remove his more constricting bandages and go out to train. Valerie, her arm in a splint, was quickly sent after him and the two instead went into town to pick up supplies. This quickly turned into Zoro being nearly conscripted into aiding in the repairs. Wood and stone needed to be cut and Zoro easily could take care of that, cutting faster and more precisely than the trained woodworkers and stonemasons. Valerie eventually had to put her foot down and drag him away, reminding him that the Marines might be on the lookout for him. Usopp had been more injured than Valerie, so he took a bit longer. He then joined Valerie on any excursions out of the palace, with Zoro really being too obvious to let out. He had one of their major bounties, after all. Plus, they never knew when Zoro would turn a corner and end up in the freezing wastes of Drum Island again. Or maybe they'd just find him on the next island. It was hard to tell with the lawnmower. Nami awoke next and immediately went to go lay down with Vivi, tearfully apologizing for not being stronger so she could go help with the bomb. Vivi laughed, it's fine. Everything worked out. If I hadn't left, we might not have found the bomb in time. And I definitely couldn't have stopped the armies from fighting. How'd you do that, anyway? Zoro asked, taking a bite of an apple. It must have been quick since you were able to get the whole army on evac as well as search for the bomb. He grinned, I didn't think you had gotten that strong yet. Wanna spar? Don't even think about it. Chopper and Igaram roared at him, even as Vivi started to laugh. Well, Mr. Bushido, she had I know something you don't smirk on her face, I didn't realize it until after, but her grin widened, I got HAMSHOKUUUU she sing-songed. All of the members of the crew who were actually awake sputtered and sprayed anything in their mouths out. You what? Seriously Vivi you knocked a whole bunch of them out with it, Luffy had jerked awake while Zoro was talking. Luffy? Everyone cheered as their captain woke up. Nami got out of Vivi's bed and crawled into Luffy's. You were asleep for a while. Croc was actually a pretty tough fight. He clenched his fist with a grin and that last attack was a lot. I've never used my fruit that much for that long on a single attack. It was more tiring than the fight, shishishi. It makes sense. Robin said, you'll need to work on it more, Luffy. Devil fruit abilities are like muscles. If you don't work them out, you'll get weaker. The abilities themselves don't get weaker, but your stamina does. Luffy nodded, yeah, I know. It's like I told you all before. I could never really practice with it. Gramps was too strong and everyone else was too weak. This was really the first time I was ever forced to use it in a fight. He shook his head and don't distract me. He yelled, 1. Fuad. He chanted out, getting laughs from his crew and the guests in the room, 2, where's my hat? He looked around, smiling as Valerie tossed it to him thanks Val. The blonde shot him a thumbs up and a bright grin, and 3, seriously? You have it? I do. Vivi said, before shrugging sheepishly, don't really know how to use it though. I was kinda mad or panicked when I did. Zoro started to laugh, looks like Ace was right. You're the loser in the hockey race, Luffy. He drew his sword, closing his eyes and focusing. A very faint sheen of black started to coat Yubashiri. Whoa, you did it, Zoro. Luffy grinned, clenching his fist in glee. I can't wait to start training. No. Chopper made an X with his arms, bad. You have to get cleared by the doctor first. We're fine, Chopper. Zoro rolled his eyes, focus on Darkbro over there. He's actually hurt. Baka. Luffy has a hole in his side. Chopper barked back, though Luffy didn't seem bothered. What happened to him? Luffy asked, wincing as he saw his crewmate in such a state. Mister? What happened? Robin sighed as Terracotta brought out some food for Luffy. She smirked as Luffy freaked out, confusing her for her husband Igaram. And then he freaked out even more about twins, seeing them next to each other. It got all of them laughing until they blinked and realized all the fruit next to Luffy was gone. How does he do that? Robin muttered under her breath, anyway, mister. One had some techniques that Sanji's Tekai couldn't defend against. They basically grinded at him, so it was like getting hit with thousands of little blows rather than just one. Ah. Luffy grimaced, yeah, that would do it. Tekai can be broken through. I've shown that before. But an attack like that would definitely suck to get hit by. He looked at Chopper, he'll be okay though, right? Baka. Who the hell do you think I am? Chopper stood imperiously, he'll not only be fine, but he'll also have minimal scarring. That's my doctor. Luffy cheered and everyone else followed. Of course, that had Chopper just doing his happy dance once more. Vivi grinned in elation as she was finally given the go-ahead to stand up. She got to her feet, moving her leg around this way and that. She stretched and even hopped up and down a few times, it feels great. She kneeled and hugged Chopper, thank you so much, Tony-kun. I thought I'd be out for weeks. It had been 5 days since her injury and Chopper's medicine already had her on her feet. Even the bruising was gone. Stop praising me, stupid. That doesn't make me happy. Chopper looked very happy. Vivi rolled her eyes, of course not. She stood and patted him on the hat, any idea when Sanji will be awake? It's been almost a week. Sanji had definitely been the most injured of their entire crew. Soon, I think. Chopper said, turning to Sanji, and they both twitched in surprise as the blonde started to move, or now, I guess. He said dryly as Sanji groaned and sat up. Bjorg, anyone get the name of the elephant that ran me over? He pressed his palm to his forehead, or the herd of them, rather. Sanji. Vivi cheered, walking over to him and secretly feeling a little glad he never got to see her messed up leg. How are you feeling? She smiled brightly at him. Sanji looked up at her and his eyes immediately turned into hearts. He launched himself up, pirouetting in the air, Vivi Chuan. He landed on one foot, your beautiful face fills me with energy. Umbus. Vivi and Chopper both yelled as he winced and crumbled back into bed, stay in bed, stupid. You got hurt the worst out of all of us. They yelled at him. Wait, I did. Not the national treasure. Sanji sounded horrified by this fact. Vivi's smile was playfully cruel, you were asleep 5 days, Sanji-kun. Zoro woke up right after Tony-kun and Robin. DRK. Sanji nearly choked at the thought, slumping in dejection. Honestly. Chopper groaned as he hurried to tend to the cook, why does the crew have to be filled with such hot-headed morons? Vivi snorted, we wouldn't have it any other way, would we? But Sanji finally up, the grand banquet for their victory was set for later that night. Sanji was forcibly kept in bed for a while longer, so Vivi decided to wander about. She found herself in the inner courtyard, where her crew and dozens of guards were hard at work, training. Zoro was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the square with 2 huge stones hovering in the air, his arms held out and holding them up. Luffy was in the sky, having an aerial duel with Pell. The sight brought both melancholy and happiness. She was ecstatic that Pell had survived, but Chaka had been cruelly slain. Her home was down one of its protectors. She pulled her eyes away and looked to the right, where Nami was currently sparring with 5 royal guards. She had a basic staff in hand and was using it expertly to fend off the assault from the guards. Valerie was sitting near Zoro, and Vivi wasn't too sure what she was doing. She had her umbrella, but she was also facing another boulder about as big as the 2 Zoro was working out with. To her left, Robin was squatting in a horse stance with her arms held out. Vivi winced as 2 guards took turns with staves to whack at her. She was really glad Sanji was still in bed because his flaming feet would have been flying over Robin's Tekai training. With Chopper still with him in the infirmary, the only one missing was the Longnose. As she approached Nami, the guard stopped and saluted her. She smiled at them quickly before turning to her girlfriend, where's Usopp? She asked curiously as she sidled up to Nami and gave her a hug. I figured Luffy would have had him working out already. He would, but Usopp is working on a new clean attack for me. Nami replied, squeezing back, I feel naked without it. Hopefully, he'll even be able to make some improvements. I would too. Vivi smiled, it was the only reason we were able to hurt that bastard. We almost ended it by ourselves. She said playfully. Nami grinned in return as Vivi backed away and she refocused on the guards. They quickly attacked once more when Vivi was clear. Vivi went up to another group of soldiers, I want to train too. 5 of you, with me. What? The lead soldier looked aghast, Your Highness, we couldn't possibly. You can and you will. Vivi said, putting on her princess face, it's an order. And don't hold back either. The guard looked mulishly reluctant, 1 at a time then. He said, raising his spear. I wouldn't have called all 5 of you over for 1 at a time. Vivi shook her head, I was in bed for 5 days. I need to get back in action. Now all of you, please attack me. I'll just be dodging for now. The guards really wanted to refuse her orders, but a quick glare from the princess, who was starting to get a little irritated, silenced them. One of them even panicked at the glare and quickly attacked with his spear. Vivi casually inclined her head to the left and the weapon passed by her harmlessly. She was focusing hard on the feelings the war had generated in her mind's eye. She'd already used Kanbunchaku consciously. Now she needed to do it consciously. With the guards rapidly growing astonished over her agility and ability to dodge even when they actually started to try to hit her, Vivi let out a smile. She thought she had already proved she wasn't a helpless little waif, though apparently, it would take a while to stick. As she got in her groove, she even closed her eyes and let her body react, training both her budding haki and kami at the same time. And not a shred of dignity. One of the watching soldiers said, sweating. Another replied, meals in the Great Hall are supposed to be stately affairs. Another agreed, and yet that didn't change the sight of the figurative mountains of food that the pirates were consuming. Luffy had a plate of onigiri next to him, one in hand, and a whole shank of meat still on the bone in the other. Most of the rest of the crew weren't anywhere near as messy as him, but they were still eating like it was their last meal. The soldiers couldn't even see Sanji's knife as he perfectly diced his meat and consumed it while asking about various recipes. Chopper was practically inhaling a pasta dish. Zoro had an absolutely massive bottle of sake in one hand and his fork in the other. The girls at the table all had table manners like Sanji, though even they were going through the food like they hadn't eaten in days. Even the princess is in on it. One of them gaped, with their blue-haired beauty engaging Robin in conversation as they ate so fast their arms were blurring. As they watched, first disappointed and weirded out and then increasingly amused as the night went on. The stately dinner turned into a party, with everyone in the room laughing gaily as Usopp stood on the table, balancing a stack of plates 15 high on the very tip of his nose. How is he doing that? A nose shouldn't be so stiff. The soldiers were all getting caught up in the Straw Hats' pace, joining in on the laughing and the cheering. My word, we're going to have to roll you out of here, Monkey-san. Cobra said in amusement as he took another sip from his mug. I wonder if you'll even fit through the door. It's just Luffy, Vivi's dad. Luffy laughed as he continued dancing on top of the table with Chopper, chopstick stuck in his nose, and Usopp. And nah, watch this. Muscle. He yelled, and his body distorted, the rolls of fat vanishing as he shrunk down, flexing hard. It was as if all the fat was converted into muscle in an instant. Wow, how did you do that? Everyone who hadn't been present to witness it on Cactus Island dropped their jaws as Luffy went from dango ball to muscled hunk in an instant. Vivi even drooled a tiny amount, which set Nami off laughing. The rest of the Straw Hats followed as the party kicked into high gear and didn't let off for a good number of hours. Holy cow. We need one of these on the ship. Luffy had stars in his eyes as they stared at the giant and beautiful marble and gold baths. He was especially excited at the lion statues that were disgorging water from their mouths. I don't think it would fit on the Mary, Luffy. Chopper said, looking amused. Cobra chuckled, these are indeed the pride of the palace. We normally only use these great baths during the rainy season. It's too much of a waste of water otherwise. I'm first. Luffy yelled, starting to run forward. No, me. Usopp roared, charging for the waters as well. And they slipped, both falling simultaneously. Zoro shook his head as he began scrubbing Chopper down, and Sanji snorted, having fun? He asked dryly. Of the Straw Hats, he was the last to have his bandages removed. His chest and leg had healed incredibly well due to Chopper's efforts, but he was still marred now due to Mr. One spinning blades. And they were still in sharp contrast on his skin, rather than faded. For Zoro they would have been a source of pride, but Sanji felt a tiny bit self-conscious about them. I guess you guys turn everything into a party, huh? My formal dinner turned into a much more lively affair than expected. Cobra said as he sat down on the raised edge of the baths. That's us. Zoro smirked before facepalming as Sanji sidled up to Igaram. So, where are the women's baths? He had a sly smile on his face. As if I'd tell you. Igaram yelled at him furiously, the princess is in there right now. They're over there. Cobra yelled, pointing over a wall. In Cobra Igaram gasped in shock, how could you? On the other side of the wall, Robin chuckled as Valerie scrubbed her back, I suggest you girls cover up. The boys are about to be boys. Vivi squeaked, how would they even know where to look? She quickly covered herself up. Luffy was the only man that got to see her. Robin Wani-sama, Nami grinned, how would you know that they were coming? Perhaps you were doing a little watching of your own? Robin smiled beatifically, I am a healthy young woman, of course, and they are certainly specimens. She tapped her chin as Vivi jaw dropped, I'm a little curious though. Neither Zoro nor Luffy are coming over. I'm almost disappointed. Well, Luffy can see me anytime he wants. Nami laughed before she playfully groped Vivi just to the side of her breasts. And I don't think our little princess here would object too strenuously. And Nami. Vivi squeaked, trying to grasp her hands before her girlfriend discovered her tickle spots. Ha. I wonder if our swordsman isn't interested in ladies or if he only goes for certain types. He's probably sword sexual. Nami jeered, getting the other girls to wince at the thought. Anyone want to join me in some fun of our own? She played with the hem of her towel. Wouldn't Luffy mind? Vivi asked immediately. Nami grinned, how hard do you think he'd go on them in training? That got Valerie to laugh again, you ready then? She turned her head, looking at the wall of guys peeking at them. She and Nami stood up, happiness punch. They called out, opening their towels slightly. Immediately, Sanji's nose erupted in blood and Usopp, Cobra and Igaram followed. That'll be 100,000 Beely each, boys. For each of us. Kaya-ha-ha. Valerie laughed as she quickly sat back down. Luffy called out, and get ready to get stomped once we're back on the ship. He had an amused tone as everyone involved groaned. The girls all started to giggle, hey Luffy, want to join us? Nami called out. Vivi went bright red. Luffy shouted, won't Robin and Val get mad? Bastard. Why aren't you including the princess in that? Igaram and Cobra yelled at him, both sporting bloody noses. Hi-ha-ha-ha. Valerie laughed, I've got nothing to be ashamed of, and even if you're not my type, you're not exactly hard to look at either, Captain. Shishishi. He grinned at the rest of the guys and pulled his eyelid down, later. Back here, Straw Hat. Igaram yelled, trying to chase the vanishing pirate. Cobra caught him by the hair, Vivi didn't protest, Igaram. She's old and strong enough to make her own decisions. He raised his voice, just no funny business. He roared over the wall. Daddy. Vivi squealed from the other side. Sanji had taken his towel and was biting it like a lion, shitty, straw-hatted Zoro started to roar with laughter at the sight. Luffy landed in between Nami and Vivi and slipped into the water with them, an arm around each shoulder. Have fun? He asked, pecking Nami on the neck before repeating it on Vivi who blushed some more but snuggled up with him. Not more than a few seconds amusement. Nami denied before taking a deep breath. I suppose this is as good a time as any, isn't it Luffy? She asked softly. Yeah, Luffy said, the merriment's starting to drain away, we'll be leaving by morning, Vivi. The princess gasped and stiffened in his arms, Sanji's up now and the marines have been sniffing at the palace for days. Robin nodded, some have even tried to sneak in dressed in plainclothes. The longer we stay, the riskier it'll be. Vivi bit her lip, damn it she said lowly. What do I do, guys? She asked, starting to tear up, I love my country. Everything I did was for my country. But now. Vivi. Luffy said, whether you stay or go, you'll always be a straw hat. He kissed her gently on the cheek, we'll miss you, obviously. We want you with us. But you have to make the best decision for you and one you can live with. Nami sighed, reaching over and starting to run her fingers through Vivi's hair. I would say I am the most pragmatic one on this crew, Robin said softly, so I will say this. Whether you're here or not, Alabasta will recover. Yes, your presence will speed things along and would be a morale boost for the people, but that's it. You not being here wouldn't be a hurdle that cannot be overcome. Vivi listened carefully, biting her bottom lip. The others let her speak, additionally, you must consider what the world government will do. How they will react. She sighed, I am admittedly spitballing here, but as the one on this crew most harmed by them, I have a rather low opinion of them. You and your father's speech was excellent for defusing tensions in Alabasta, but also has made a cover-up nigh impossible. I'm sure they'll still try, Robin disparaged the government, but it is also possible that they will be incredibly angry and attempt to take it out on your family. Your admitted infiltration of Baroque works is certainly an avenue that they could pursue, if they so wished. Vivi had paled to the color of milk, oh no that made all of them sit up straighter. That looked like a much more intense reaction than pure speculation should have generated, why you might be right. Gods above, they would do that. Her face hardened, the Tenryk Beto, and here, Luffy's face went cold and furious, have always hated my family. Ever since we refused to ascend to Mar plus Joa with the rest of them. Ever since we refused to plant a sword in front of the empty throne. She huffed air through her nose in a long, heavy sigh, I have a lot to think about. And I have to talk to Daddy. She said finally. You do? Valerie said, smiling at her, just remember. No matter what you choose, you're our friend. We'll have your back, Vivi. The princess smiled, thanks guys. She took another breath, there's only one thing left to do before you leave then. She turned to Robin, I promised Robin. I'm keeping that promise. The eldest lady's smile lit up the room. May we speak, Vivi? Cobra asked once they were all out of the baths. Of course, Daddy. Vivi said, I need to speak with you too. Excellent. Then. But can it wait? Maybe an hour. 2 at most. She interrupted her father, causing him to raise an eyebrow in surprise and confusion. Don't forget protection, Vivi. He said dryly. She flushed, not that. She yelled at him. She lowered her voice and leaned in, I'm taking Luffy, Nami, and Robin to the tomb. Cobra almost choked on his spit, you're what he hissed in shock. I promised. She said gently, Robin wants to read it. To see if she can find out what happened during the Void Century. Cobra's eyes widened even more in shocked understanding, she doesn't care about Pluton at all. She just wants to know why her entire island and everyone on it had to burn. Cobra clenched a fist at the revelation, go then. I will meet you in your room. And Vivi, he paused before his face hardened, if she deigns to write down the words, I would appreciate a copy. With the actual location of the weapon redacted, of course. He said, and once that's done, whether she writes it down or not, if Luffy can destroy it, have him do so. Yes. Vivi nodded and quickly raced away. Cobra moved as well. He had something he needed to collect. The secret stairway. All four of them were cloaked, which helped them blend into the dead of night. Vivi had led them to the royal mausoleum, but had turned off the main path and pressed on several things in a pattern and revealed the secret entranceway. I never would have expected it to be here. Robin breathed, clever. She had never suspected a thing. They all quickly made their way inside and Vivi closed the entrance behind them. Thankfully, to open it again, she just had to yank on a chain. They all made their way deep underground. These stairs are obnoxiously long. Luffy chuckled, getting grins from the rest of them. The room they were led to was impressive, with various sarcophagi in the room, which was held up by dozens of pillars. Writings and hieroglyphs covered the walls. Vivi led them through the entry hall and towards the final door. She pushed it open and allowed Robin to see inside. Robin nearly shuddered in place, here it is. She said in rapture. 20 years, she breathed out before quickly making her way forward. Vivi sighed, I hate that she's going to be disappointed, she looked down. Luffy patted her on the shoulder. Robin got in front of the huge stone and quickly started to read it. Immediately, bitter disappointment started to bite at her. She read faster, trying to get to what she wished to see. But it never came. She got to the final line and finally allowed her head to hang. Here, alone but for her trusted crew and the first friends she'd made in her entire life, she allowed herself this moment of weakness. She fell to her knees, sniffling, and started to cry. Immediately, she was embraced by all three of her comrades. 20 years. She choked out. 20 years searching. 20 years of surviving, backstabbing, being backstabbed, 20 years of wondering if my people would die for nothing. The tears were really pouring now. I almost helped bring your country down, Vivi. She said brokenly, one last act of maliciousness from the devil child. This was supposed to be it. It's the only one I've found in more than a decade. She punched herself in the thigh and it would have been for nothing. She spat in furious despair, this isn't it. It's not the Rio poneglyph. Most of it just lays out where Pluton sleeps. I'm sorry, Robin. Vivi sighed, resting her head on Robin's, I did warn you, though. You did. Robin said, and still, I allowed myself to get my hopes up. Dreams don't care about logic or facts, Robin. Nami said sadly. You'll find it. Luffy said quietly, we'll make sure of it. Yeah, Vivi said, like I said. It's probably sitting on Raftel where no one else can find it, right? She forced a little giggle, which did put a smile on Robin's face. Thank you, everyone. She stood, and they did as well. She turned to them and smiled at Luffy, you really mean it? You'll help me find the rest of the poneglyphs? Of course. Luffy said, pounding a fist into his chest, I may not understand any of it myself, but it's your dream. And that makes it our dream. Vivi and Nami smiled, nodding at her. That's right. Nami said, I want to map out the whole world. She told the older woman, every island, every rock in the sea, every river, lake, desert, and rainforest. It's got to be on one of them, doesn't it? Robin smiled wider, that it does, Nami-chan. She stopped and seemed to debate with herself for a moment. She tilted her head slightly, it's a promise, then. Of course. The three agreed. Then I suppose all that's left is to seal it. Hope you don't mind, Nami, Vivi. Vivi and Nami only had half a second to wonder what she meant by that confusing statement before she stepped forward and pulled Luffy closer. All of their eyes went wide as Robin gave him an absolutely searing kiss with all the passion she could muster. Luffy floundered for a moment in shock before kissing back. Really? Vivi laughed dryly, below my family's tomb. Don't ruin it. Robin pulled back. Ho, that was interesting, Miss Archaeologist. Nami said, looking amused, I hope you're ready to pay for your sins. She grabbed Robin and kissed her just as passionately as Robin had kissed Luffy. Luffy and Vivi stared, hugging one another, by Haether, that's hot. Vivi mumbled, much to Luffy's amusement. Robin and Nami pulled away from each other before Robin turned to Vivi, who blushed hotly. I'm sorry, Vivi. For everything. She hugged the younger girl, and thank you, for being my friend. Oh, just shut up and kiss me. Vivi stood on her tiptoes to reach the taller woman's lips. Looks like 3 have become 4. Nami laughed, leaning on Luffy, who joined her in amusement. It took less time than she thought, but with the kissing done, Robin quickly wrote down the contents of the poneglyph in her personal journal, both in the original language and with her translation, though she didn't dare write down the actual location. She didn't even put it down as untranslated text. All this shit for what was on this rock. Nami breathed out, thinking of all they had been through leading up to this. What even is Pluton? A weapon of unimaginable power. Vivi said lowly. What she said. One of 3 ancient weapons. Robin confirmed, it is a warship. Or rather, the warship. What took 10 massive, heavily armed ships and multiple vice admirals to do to my home, it was said Pluton could do in one shot. Holy shit, Nami cursed, looking wide-eyed at the poneglyph. Not that I want the thing, but out of curiosity, where is it? Isn't it dangerous for us to know? Vivi quickly threw in. None of us care about the stupid thing, right? Luffy asked, so as long as it doesn't leave this place and we never speak of it again, it should be fine. Of course, it's up to Robin. Robin hesitated before crossing her arms and closing her eyes. She saw no one nearby. No one hidden. No one even approaching the entrance. Feeling comfortable, she uncrossed her arms and let out a dark sigh, in simultaneously the best and worst possible location it could be. She rubbed the back of her neck in a very uncharacteristic nervous tick, somewhere that, should people find out about it, they wouldn't dare attack. Probably not even the world government would dare. That's good, right? Vivi asked hesitantly. Not exactly. Robin said, looking rather terrified of the knowledge, because the reason they wouldn't dare is because it's in Wano. Nami paled, oh, you have got to be kidding me. Wano? Luffy and Vivi both looked confused. Wano. Robin said, Akka, Caden's turf. And if he finds out about it? No more needed to be said. Every single bit of color had drained out of Vivi's face. Then we never speak of it again. Luffy said, making the 3 girls nod in agreement. Including after we beat Caden. He added nonchalantly. All 3 girls joked. She really should have been surprised, but Vivi still couldn't believe that Luffy hadn't been able to destroy the poneglyph. She knew that the damn thing was tough and basically impossibly strong, but to survive the heat she had felt even from as far away as the entrance to the tomb still, Luffy had been able to do more than anyone else before him. Trusted artisans and scientists had occasionally been allowed in the tomb, blindfolded, of course, and allowed to try to mess with them in the past. After all, if they could replicate them, any building made of the material would be equally as tough. But nothing anyone had ever done had left even a scratch on one of them. And according to Robin, the world government had tried, for sure. They didn't want the damn things floating around or being sources of temptation. But without knowing how they were made, no one had ever been able to replicate the material or even scratch out the messages on them. Luffy had not been able to destroy it, but the location of the weapon was now forever destroyed by a melted handprint on its surface. His fruit truly was broken. At the moment, she was waiting for her father. She was on her bedroom's veranda, staring at the dark horizon. It was a full moon tonight, so despite the relative chill of the desert night, she felt like breathing in her home's nice, clean air. She could also see pretty far out. The stars were gorgeous with such clear skies, especially now that many of the city's lights were out as people went to bed. This was it. Everything she had fought for. Everything she had wanted for years, as this piece was slowly chipped away at over time by her hated enemy. So why did she feel so conflicted? Hollow even. It should have been simple. Save her home. Come back and help lead her people. Be the queen she was born to be. And yet nothing was simple anymore. She had changed. Slowly at first, as she cried herself to sleep so many nights, muffling her voice on Kara's feathers. And then as time went on, she had felt almost numb over the vamp she was forced to perform, the crimes she had to commit. Igaram had shielded her as best as he could, but eventually, they were separated. Given separate jobs. She had to wonder when she had been discovered, given that Robin allowed her to learn of Crocodile. When her act had failed. Used to be I couldn't keep you in the castle, with how often you ran out to explore or join your friends or meet and greet with the people. Her father's voice sounded behind her, putting a smile on her face. How many times did I have to send the guards out chasing you? Daddy. She flung herself into his arms and hugged him for all she was worth. It wasn't that many times. Back. Careful, Vivi. Cobra laughed, you'll break an old man like me. Though he laughed harder at her blatant unsuccessful lying. She giggled and flicked his chest, as if. You've got another couple decades in you, right? If that's what the people wish. He smiled gently and patted the top of her head. His smile became slightly melancholic, which Vivi noticed immediately. Daddy? She looked at him in surprise, what's wrong? He smiled again, 3 years gone, and you can still read me like a book, huh? He sat down on her bed and gestured for her to do the same. As she did, he wrapped an arm around her shoulder, the Straw Hats are planning on leaving soon, aren't they? Ah. Vivi flinched a bit, looking at her knees. Straight to it, then. Yeah. she said finally, before dawn in fact. I thought so. He closed his eyes, smile more firmly on his face. I'll miss you, my wonderful daughter. Washi stiffened and her head jerked towards him in surprise. Daddy, she hesitated. I haven't decided that yet. She trailed off lamely. Cobra burst out laughing. Oh my girl, you're a couple decades too young to be pulling one over on your old man. At her puffed up look of affront, he chuckled a bit more, even if you seem to be making a valiant attempt at pulling one over on yourself. He brushed her hair off of her face. I didn't enter with those words for no reason, Vivi. From the time you learned how to run to the time you disappeared, there was scarcely a day that I didn't have to have you collected by our soldiers. You always preferred being out there. In the city. With the people. He patted her on the head, and yet even after your leg healed, you haven't been out of the castle once, except for tonight. With each word, Vivi flinched some more. She trailed off lamely, knowing it was true. She had kept making excuses to herself. That she needed to spend as much time as possible with her friends before they left her behind. But her father was right. She had been lying to herself. I know you, Vivi. He said gently, cupping her chin. I know how you must have suffered the past 2 years. How many times did you dream of being back here with us, being able to gaze upon Alubarna in its nighttime splendor? How many times did you dream of peace restored? She closed her eyes and let a tear fall, every night. Every day. She quivered. I had Igaram of course, but no one else but Karu. No one knew the real me. No one else could be trusted. Not even the one person I could have maybe called a friend in the organization. And I was forced to do so many awful things just to keep my cover. She shuddered, another wet tear falling and leaving a track on her face. Cobra gently wiped it away, and yet, now that you're back, now that Crocodile is gone, his plans scuppered, and his organization dismantled, he let out a sad smile. All I see you doing is looking towards the horizon. She opened her mouth to refute him, but the words wouldn't come. Her lips clicked shut and she started to cry. Why? She asked, burrowing her face in his chest. Why? Why does even the thought of having to watch them sail away fill me with nothing but dread? He rubbed the back of her head gently, holding her as he had dreamed of doing for 3 long, dark, difficult years. You set out to save Alabasta. Save your people. He kissed the top of her head, and you did. You saved all of us. Millions of people are only alive because of you. You even brought the rain back. The tensions, the hatred, the infighting, the suspicion, you dispelled all of it, my wonderful daughter, and not even close to your 20th birthday on top of it. You've already done more for Alabasta than dozens of past kings. 100 years of history may have been lost, but the Nefertari had ruled Alabasta long before the formation of the world government. Despite herself, she let out a watery smile, still clutching his shirt in a trembling fist. And yet, the young princess that left this tower long ago is not the same one that came back. You've grown so strong, Vivi. You always had the will, but now you have the strength to back it up too. He jokingly squeezed her bicep, which made his now crying daughter let out a wet giggle. And now you still love Alabasta. Still love your people. But we both know you're happiest when you're with them. You're always laughing when listening to their stories. Or when going along with one of Longnose Kun's fanciful lies. Or dancing with them in one of their wild parties. You've even found love. He laughed as she sprang away, blushing wildly and prepared to start making blind denials. Oh yes you have, daughter. I see it in your eyes and face every time you look at them. He cut her off at the pass. I should know. How could I not? It was the same look your mother had whenever she looked at me. Her head dipped and the tears started flowing freely again, but her lower lip trembled. Alabasta needs their princess. She said mechanically. Yes. He admitted, making her spine turn to ice. Having you here would make rebuilding all the smoother. He confirmed, and then when Alabasta is rebuilt and you yearn for nothing more than the return of your friends, their ship will have long since sailed. He gazed at her with his own watery eyes. I love you, Vivi. He said gruffly, his own tears falling, but if you stay here, if you don't go with them, you will regret it forever. You'll go back to having no true friends. Even Kamza can only see himself as a subject now. He's evaded the palace, evaded you, ever since the fighting ended. You'll chafe here without them. Under the rules and stuffy expectations of royalty. Forced to marry a man you likely never love as much as you love them. Damn it. Vivi cried out, you're supposed to be trying to convince me to stay, not go. He laughed in response. Oh Vivi, what have I always told you? To follow my heart. She replied wetly, Daddy. She wailed and tackled him down to the bed, sobbing into his chest. Exactly. Again, he rubbed the back of her head, though this time he was crying in full himself. A few moments passed, where they shared what they knew could be one of the last hugs they'd ever give each other. Eventually, they forced themselves up, and he spoke again. I'll miss you so much, Vivi. I don't want you to go, truthfully. But you must. I know you already spoke of it with them. Cobra tapped her on the nose playfully, making her scrunch her face up. I didn't catch much of it, but I heard enough. Sound moves pretty well in the baths, after all, and I was close after our little incident. Vivi was caught between a glare at the reminder and a snigger over the result. Naiko-san is right. After all this, it's more than possible that the Tenryubito try to ruin this happiness we've managed to scrounge up. Those damn bastards. Vivi looked away, her face closing up as she tried to keep herself under control. For more reasons than you know. He said, sighing. He reached into his pocket. This, my daughter, he lowered his voice to a whisper, is possibly even more dangerous a secret than the poneglyph. He handed her a folded up letter. Her brow furrowed after she got over her shock. She stared at it for a moment before opening it. Her eyes quickly scanned the letter, her eyes growing, until she got to the end. D. Nefertari D. Lily. We. He held his finger up to his lips, gently shushing her. I don't know much of what it means. He sighed, but I know there has to be a reason we've never gone public with this information. A reason every monarch is only ever shown it when crowned and sworn to secrecy. He sighed, so yes, I hope we're wrong. But I wouldn't put it past them, and that terrifies me more than anything. Even if I didn't know you belong out there now, I'd still be pushing you to leave. She sighed, I guess this is it, then. She closed her eyes, biting her bottom lip and clenching her fists. Damn it, she whispered lowly, before hugging him as tight as she could without hurting him. I'm going to miss you so much. She wailed. Me too. His right arm was over his eyes. His tone was as gruff as she'd ever heard, and he was fighting his own sadness down. Me too. His voice cracked for a moment. For a good long time, nothing more was said as parent and child cried themselves out. They did nothing more than enjoy the other's presence for the last time in a good long while. And then Cobra let out a goofy chuckle, who knows, maybe once your Luffy becomes the pirate king, you can claim this island and come visit. Vivi burst out laughing in exchange, great idea. We just have to wait for him to make Yunkum first. I'm sure he'd love it. She started laughing even harder, if for no other reason than the food. Cobra started laughing outright. She stood, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I felt like I was being torn in two. She admitted, taking another deep breath, but I'll be damned if I leave without preparing our people for trouble. She declared, turning around and marching to her closet. Cobra looked confused, what is that supposed to mean? You have no time to do more than you all have already done. He watched her open her closet and deadpanned when he saw the massive pile of clothes that practically fell out and buried her before she started flinging it all into the room. Vivi, he groaned, have you still not kicked that habit? You haven't even been back for a week and your closet already looks like that. Oh, ye of little faith. She giggled, trust me, this was very much on purpose. Half of this isn't even mine. That only left her father more confused. Finally, she reached it, finally. She said, and then pulled a chest out of the mess of strewn and piled clothes. The chest. Vivi, what have you done? Cobra stood and walked over to her, meeting her at the table. And here, he nearly flinched as he saw a smile better fitting Luffy than his daughter on her face, a little of this she opened the chest, and a little of that. She smiled even wider as she saw her father nearly choke on his own tongue. Is this? He gazed down at it in near rapture. The Suna no Mi. Vivi confirmed, running her finger on the fruit, being careful to avoid any of the sharp prickly points. The fruit looked like a spherical tan barrel cactus, with two stubby arms pointing upwards. It had the typical swirls of a devil fruit, though in its case, the prickly spikes made up the actual pattern. The top was covered in green leaves, looking almost like a silly haircut, with a lighter green T-shaped stem rising above the fruit, with the right side of it being longer and curling. As soon as Robin saw Luffy's last attack, she had Zoro start carrying her so she could search for it. It took her almost 20 minutes to find it. Was a miracle no one found it first. Vivi, this fruit should go to you. Cobra shook his head, realizing what she wanted, you'll need the extra. No. Vivi said. She didn't snap, but she was very firm. First, this fruit will never be as strong out there as it is here in the desert. Here it was born, the first known usage of it came from an Alabastan queen, after all. And here it should stay. It is Alabasta's sacred treasure. It should be here, guarding our home. With its power to generate sandstorms, there is no greater way to defend the capital from an invading force. She sighed heavily, I hope it never comes to that, but you never know with the world government. I don't think they would, but if ordered by those fucking old men at the top, he didn't have the heart to scold her for her language, even one of the sacred 20 wouldn't be safe. We already saw that even in the desert, it can be defeated. He said softly. Yes. Vivi nodded, which is why this isn't the only thing in this chest. She pulled out a book, written by none other than Robin. She had the best handwriting and was also the best at taking and forcing better explanations from their more hard-headed crew and turning it into passable instructions. She placed it on the desk, instructions for both Haki and the Rakishiki, the martial arts Luffy has been teaching all of us. She grinned viciously, let's see them try to walk over us with every soldier in the country training in their precious secret techniques. Cobra started to laugh, apparently I missed this little vicious streak while observing how much you had grown. And she was back to blushing. Typical. He patted her hand over the book, I'll get this to Pell. No doubt he'll be ecstatic to learn new techniques. He sighed, and I'll have to dig Kamza out of Yuba again. With Shaka gone he sighed again as Vivi looked down, if he wants to repent, I will let him. No doubt he will be one of our stronger defenders. He took a knife from her and carved out a piece of the cactus, well, I suppose it's past time I got back in shape. He patted his stomach, after your mother passed I well let myself go. Oh please. Vivi rolled her eyes, if that's you out of shape, I'd hate to see what you call fat. Kiki Cobra chuckled before biting down on the fruit. Vivi had never seen her father bawl before, so she almost felt bad about feeding the disgusting fruit to him. At least you only need one bite. She cringed as he glared at her, most people don't know that and force themselves to eat the entire fruit. One bite I'll never get back. He growled, still crying crocodile tears. Gods, that was disgusting. If I didn't know that was a devil fruit I'd be off to get my stomach pumped. He looked at his hand, forcing it to turn into sand. It was surprisingly easy to do, and he stared at the limb in contemplation. Big baby. She rolled her eyes, though she did so playfully. You want a piece? His glare darkened. No thanks. She chirped, chuckling. She then launched herself at him, hugging him tight. I'll miss you, daddy. She mumbled for the nth time that night. He held her tight, as will I, Vivi. As will I. He let go, looking puzzled, shouldn't I have turned into sand when you touched me? It's not automatic. She shook her head, you have to train yourself to do so instinctively. Anytime there's danger. She grinned, you're lucky, actually. Luffy was always on a hair trigger when he got his fruit because he was so young. Every time he felt even mildly uncomfortable, he would do it by mistake. He instead had to train himself not to transform every time something touched him. His fruit is insanely dangerous. He cringed, yes, I suppose there's that. She shifted her weight back and forth, will you really be okay? She asked in a tiny voice. Will Alabasta really be okay? You if I leave, you'll have no air. Boy. He jabbed playfully, my hair isn't going anywhere. Oh lord, you're a goofball. She burst out laughing. He chuckled again, those are an old man's worries, Vivi. You let your father worry about that. He kissed her forehead one last time, go he said softly, you have a life to live with him. Don't let it go to waste. She closed her eyes and steeled herself. She gave him a beaming smile, I'll love you forever, daddy. She gave him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He returned the favor, you as well my lovely princess. He gently caressed her cheek, be strong, my daughter you'll have many hurdles to overcome as a pirate. He gave her his widest smile, with luck, one day we'll see each other again. Whatever it takes. She whispered, goodbye daddy. With one last lingering gaze, Vivi vanished in a whisper of wind. That girl. He smiled, she's faster than the supersonic duck squad now. His voice warbled as his eyes started leaking again. He walked over to her bed and fell into it, eyes covered by his arm as he trembled. He was barely able to keep his pitiful sobs from escaping. He didn't move again for a long time. There she is. Luffy grinned widely as the supersonic duck squadron arrived at the Going Merry. She did look like there had been a bit of a fight, putting a frown on all of their faces. Arf. The Kung Fu dugongs all leapt out of the tributary, which was much larger than it was when they arrived, after all the rain, ready for action, before realizing who was there. They immediately bowed to Luffy, some of them looking slightly injured. Hey guys. You protected the ship for us. Luffy patted one on the head. Arf. They all saluted. Good job boys. You kept the ship safe for us. Nami gave the leader a hug before standing and smirking slightly, any of you managed the attack Luffy showed you? Arf. All of the dugongs hunched over, looking depressed. Ha. Well, that's good. If you lot had managed it before me, I'd be pretty mad. Valerie couldn't help but giggle. Luffy chuckled, well, I suppose that was a bit too hard for beginners. He grinned at them, okay then. Not a problem. You'll just have to work your way up to it. First with Zoro. He vanished and appeared in the middle of the pack, getting the closest ones to jump in shock and then get him. He began to bounce. All of them started to look starry-eyed as he landed, we can't take any of you with us, so make sure you keep protecting Alabasta, okay? Arfarfarf. The barking sounded off as they all saluted their sensei. Luffy turned to the ducks, thanks for the ride, guys. Pretty sure the Marines will have it out for us, so saving energy for the escape sure helps. Vivi got off of Karo and pressed her forehead to his, thank you for everything Karo, I'm going to miss you so much. Karo let out a surprised and indignant sounding quack, which Chopper didn't need to translate into what do you mean goodbye. I'm coming with you, stupid. For them to understand. He tried stepping past her and onto the ship's gangplank, but Vivi held him firm. "Not this time, Karu." She sighed, starting to tear up, "You belong here in the desert. I can't watch you get sick over and over again. Don't you remember what Chopper said?" Once everything was said and done, Chopper had finally been able to examine the huge duck. Unfortunately, he had found long-term damage in the desert-adapted species. "You've already started damaging your lungs. Another couple years and you would have started having trouble breathing. Chopper already thinks you knocked a few years off your life expectancy." Karu apparently realized that she was serious and started to tear up. "Oh." Vivi's face started to turn red as tears pooled in her eyes. "Damn it, please don't cry. You're going to make me cry too." She held back a sob, wrapping her arms around Karu's neck. Pear wrapped a wing around her, quacking mournfully. She pulled back and placed a kiss on his head. "You be good for daddy, okay boy?" She smiled, "And make sure you help Pell kick the rest of our lazy soldiers into shape," she demanded playfully. Hands on her hips. Quack. Karu saluted her, still crying softly. "You know the basics of our style too. We'll need you to teach the rest of the squad. Protect our home while I'm gone, okay?" Vivi asked of him, and he nodded resolutely. She broke and hugged him tight one last time. "I'll miss you, Karu. And I'll always love you, my friend. Thank you for being with me for so long." He nuzzled her back and then she pulled away. She bit her lip. "I won't say goodbye." She took a deep breath. "We'll see each other again. So instead I'll see you later, okay?" The rest of the crew didn't begrudge her when she walked up the gangplank and simply stared off into the desert rather than doing work with the rest of them. They quickly got the ship unmoored and then joined her in waving at the ducks and dugongs. Nami was hugging her gently from the side. "It hurts," Vivi admitted quietly. "It was always going to hurt, no matter what you chose." Nami sighed. "We would never have begrudged you if you stayed," she said, "but I can't say I'm not glad you came." Vivi let out a watery smile, leaning and pecking her girlfriend on the side of the lips. "It's so peaceful now," she said after a few moments. "Let's enjoy it." Robin sidled up to them with a smile, "Because I'm pretty sure we all know what will be waiting for us once we sail out of this river." Oh, they certainly did. The only question was how big the response would be. Boy, Usopp looked kind of blue, "Isn't that a bit much?" he asked, looking at the marine ships on the horizon. There were over a dozen of them. They weren't full battleships, but they most certainly were warships. And fast ships too. They were closing in fast. "Well, we did shit in their cereal bowls," Zoro drawled, fingering Wadden with a slight smirk on their face. "Did they even release an official statement regarding Alabasta yet?" "Nope," Nami said, pale but smirking. "I'm guessing that means they don't think a bounty increase will matter with whatever response they're sending." "Vivi, get down below," Luffy commanded. "It's probably for the best to keep you being here quiet. At least until we're away." "Right. They'll find out eventually, but delaying it for an island or two won't hurt. That'll give the soldiers time to train just in case." She nodded, not liking that she wouldn't be able to fight, but understanding the need. "I'll help Usopp with the cannons." She grabbed their sniper and the two headed below deck. "You guys ready for this?" Luffy asked, watching the ships grow bigger. "Hahaha, all this for little old us." Valerie's face was full of bravado. "And sweat. Plenty of that too." "They're not in my range yet," Robin reported, preparing herself for the coming fight. It felt strange to not be hiding from the Marines, but that ship had well and truly sailed now. She had shown herself with the crew in Rain Base, after all, and she doubted she wasn't heavily reported on due to it. Not that she would have hidden now anyway. Without her, they'd be strapped seriously thin. No matter how strong they were, Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Valerie and Sanji wouldn't be able to defend Mary all by themselves. Especially if the strongest of them had to actually engage any strong opponents. The response from the Marines was bound to be big. Chopper would be helping with the cannons too, as well as patching the ship if needed. "They are in mine." Zoro grinned, drawing Wadden slightly from its sheath. "Then let's say hello," Luffy called out with a grin. Zoro took a deep breath, closing his eyes as he focused his budding Busumshoku. Wadden darkened in his hand, and then his eyes snapped open. "Itmrik. Sangakurikage pound HM." An absolutely monster slash erupted from the tip of his blade, crossing the distance between Mary and Zoro's targeted vessel, far faster than even the cannonballs could fly. The Marines panicked, trying to sail the ship out of the way, but it was too late. Zoro's attack hit the ship dead center on the prow and split the whole thing in half. It was a clean slice too, with such a nice finish that the slice seemed to shine as if it was freshly oiled. The ship split in half and continued sailing as it parted. The port half crashed into another ship and caused a huge explosion as its powder stores detonated, but the starboard half was blown up by cannonballs shot by the ship directly starboard of it, since that crew was much more on the ball. One of the two commanders of the Marine fleet on that ship ground his teeth. "So, that's how far these rookies have come?" He growled furiously, his eyes bloodshot. He was a rather huge man dressed in a fancy suit with a cape over his shoulders. His face was heavily scarred, with 4X carved onto his flesh and a further 2 on his neck. Sensei was right to send us. He grabbed a microphone from a den mushi, destroy that vessel. He yelled furiously, these villains will know no light nor another day. Do not fear the captain's Loja power, for we are here and we will make him pay for his crimes. For absolute justice. Sir, yes sir. The Marines roared out before giant plumes of smoke erupted in front of each ship as they fired the forward-facing turrets. Here it comes. Luffy yelled before his brow furrowed, wait a minute, his eyes widened, careful. They're harpoons, not cannonballs. He clenched his fist, and no Gatling. His arm turned golden and started spewing out hundreds of plasma balls with a strange warbling throbbing sound. They intercepted dozens of the harpoons and started to melt them, but they were fairly meaty harpoons and their momentum had them still falling just short of their little ship. But some made it through and the giant hunks of sharpened steel pierced through their little ship's hull. Of course, Nami growled, they couldn't make things easy for us, could they? Crescento's fleur. Robin crossed her arms, pushing her abilities as far as she currently could. It was already a vast marked improvement over her maximum of 100 arms back when she had joined the Straw Hats. She had been putting in quite the effort. Instantly 300 arms bloomed on the various enemy ships, grabbing seasoned sailors and soldiers, putting them into inescapable joint locks. Clutch. Cries of agony rang out on every vessel as arms, legs, necks, and spines were mercilessly snapped. And even then, the arms weren't idle. They manned the cannons and turrets in place of their marine crews and started firing on friendly vessels. Massive bangs rang out as Robin, drilled by Usopp in preparation for this and using her Hana no Mi to bloom her eyes inside the enemy ship's holds, quickly located and aimed for the powder magazines. Catastrophic damage hit half a dozen ships. The most Robin could focus on at one time. The powder magazines blew sky high, blowing the tops off ships and turned each mighty war vessel into blazing wrecks on the sea. But one of the ships did not go according to plan. Near the other end of the line of vessels, a man drew his sword and released a flying slash at a row of arms. Robin was forced to disperse them almost immediately or else her real arms were going to get amputated. Her eyes widened in shock. Back on the Mary, they have vice admirals. She gasped out in complete shock, which was quickly mirrored on the rest of the crew's faces. Back aboard the ship, the second vice admiral, a rather severe man named Onagumo, growled furiously, come in, Doberman. He raised his own den. I can confirm that Nico Robin is indeed on that ship. I repeat, it was not a temporary alliance as the brass hoped. The devil child Nico Robin is now a Straw Hat pirate. He almost crushed his poor den, belay the order to simply destroy them. That woman is a danger to the world, but in the right hands is also a boon. Agreed. Doberman answered, capture her immediately. All units, damage that ship beyond repair. That woman must not escape absolute justice. We will take care of this ourselves. With that, the two vice admirals leapt from their respective vessels, utilizing Geppen to great effect. They're coming. Robin yelled out, realizing immediately that the greatest danger was on the way. They're using Geppen. Shit. Even Luffy was sweating a bit, guys, I've got the one on the left. Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Val, you guys are going to have to share. He took off without another word, utilizing Geppen to get far from the ship before stopping and simply igniting his feet. I'm a little busy at the moment. Valerie cried out, utilizing her super lightweight to get in front of the ship with her umbrella in hand. A spear came close and she let out a yell of exertion, smacking it with her 10,000 kilo umbrella and knocking it away from the Mary before flashing and doing the same to another harpoon on the other side. He's all yours, guys. She panted as she used Soru again. Oh. We've got the ship. Robin yelled as their cannon fired. Usopp's expert shot pierced Onagumo's ship right above the waterline and the vessel immediately began taking on water. With the vice admiral no longer present, Robin took the opportunity to bloom arms there again and forcibly spin the wheel to ram the ship into another marine vessel. High in the air, Onagumo and Luffy stopped in front of each other, so, you're Straw Hat. The vice admiral spat, I thought you'd be bigger. Surrender and your demise shall be swift. You're not too good at that negotiating thing, huh? Luffy deadpanned as he floated gently in the air, also, damn you're ugly. Fool. Onagumo drew his two blades, which instantly blackened with Busumshoku, making Luffy TSK. You're not ready for this stage, Straw Hat. I tried to be merciful, and you spat in my face. His eyes darkened, now die. For the safety and security of our world. He flashed forward, proving he knew more of the Rakishiki than just Geppen. Luffy held his hands out and with a thrumming swoosh sound, long, thin beams of his plasma solidified into dual staves in his hands. His plasma hit the man's blades with loud clangs, ugh, that hockey stuff sucks. Luffy complained, seeing that his weapons were having no effect on the man's very meltable steel. My Busmushoku is far more powerful than most. Onagumo growled, you won't get through it anytime soon. Oh really? Luffy grinned, let's test that, shall we? And with that, he blurred from sight. Onagumo followed a second later and a shockwave erupted from their clash. They vanished again and another shockwave rang out and then another and another. They came from all angles, completely ignoring gravity, attacking from above, below, and the sides. Again and again, the two fighters clashed, with each strike between them sounding like a bomb had gone off. Zoro, Nami, and Sanji joined the two in the air, meeting up with Vice Admiral Doberman in the air. Storm Empress, Demon of the Three Blades, and he paused, some riff I don't know. Sanji clenched his cigarette between his teeth as Zoro chuckled. Don't worry, you poor thing. I'll fix your face right quick. Arrogant fools. Surrender, and your deaths will be quick and painless. He demanded. Nami rolled her eyes, has that ever actually worked? Doberman ignored the question, time to pay for your crimes, pirates. He charged, taking Zoro aback from his speed and strength. The green-haired man grunted in shock from his sheer strength as their swords clashed and was immediately forced back. Sanji flashed forward and unleashed a devastating kick directly on the man's jaw, shoot. Heck I. Doberman growled out, stealing his facial muscles. Despite that, his head jerked back with the sound of a gunshot and a tooth went flying from his mouth. He watched it arc through the air before growling and backhanding Sanji as hard as he could. DRK. Sanji groaned out as he caught the blow with his shin, wincing as he felt his leg throb from the impact even with his own defensive Tekai. So, you're stronger than you look. Doberman growled out as he dodged a hard swipe from Nami's staff, the nimble woman sailing away easily from his swipe with his sword. Very well then. Enjoy that kick. It's the only one you're going to land. He raced after Sanji, aiming to cut him in half. Onigiri. Zoro yelled as he flashed upwards, his arms crossed. He smashed clean into Doberman, cutting through his suit and coat. But his blades wouldn't penetrate his flesh, which was blackened with Busmushoku. Shit. I told you. That was the one hit you three were going to get. Doberman growled like his namesake, you shouldn't have wasted it. Luffy had been ramping up his speed since the fight had started, but he truly wasn't as good with two staves as he was with his pipe. He let one of them go, grabbing the single remaining, and no longer, staff in both hands. He attacked with much more skill and ferocity now, and Onagumo was starting to sweat as he realized just how much of a threat Luffy actually was. The most dangerous thing about Luffy's staff was that it could attack from angles you couldn't anticipate, since it would travel through Luffy's body without harming him, obviously. And his sheer speed Onagumo hated to admit it, but Luffy was far better at Rakishiki than he was. The pirate wasn't even using haki, and yet his hands were starting to get a little numb. This rookie was much stronger than rookies normally were. Onagumo also picked up the pace, launching an air slash at Luffy. Luffy simply cut off his powers, allowing him to drop below the slash, and then reignited them rushing for Onagumo. The Vice Admiral ground his teeth in exertion as Luffy's devastating leg kick landed, making the limb throb in pain. His Busmushoku took most of it, but the impact plus Luffy's devil fruit made sure it hurt. And it wasn't the first one he had landed. He had been aiming for it. After all, the man would be unable to get men keep himself in the air with a broken knee. Trying to cripple my mobility, you damned pirate, you'll have to try much harder than that. Onagumo roared as he flashed down at Luffy, his finger pointed, Shigen. Heck I. Luffy blocked it and allowed the blow to knock him away to create space. Onagumo chased him with an air slash, and Luffy launched a Rankyaku at it. The two slashes impacted and ground against each other for a few seconds with a shrieking sound before vanishing. Luffy immediately followed up, using Kamisori to try to disorient the Vice Admiral before coming in from below and trying to rip right through Onagumo's chin and destroy his brain with his staff. Onagumo's block held for a moment before his arms were flung wide and Luffy passed him before bouncing off the air and rocketing down. Luffy raised his staff above his head and swung it down with a roar. Onagumo growled out and 6 more arms popped out of his back as he activated his devil fruit. These weren't like his normal arms, no, they were spindly thin hairy things. And each of them was holding a new sword which crossed in front of him and blocked Luffy's blow. What the heck? Luffy burst out, you've got 8 arms you stupid spider. That's right. Onagumo straightened out, you were too slow, Straw Hat. Now perish. He raced forward, all 8 swords primed to cut Luffy's head off. You first. Luffy raised his arm, Enten no Tame. He yelled out, and a much smaller but more concentrated version of his final attack against Crocodile blasted out of his palm. DRK. Onagumo grunted as he crossed all of his swords in front of him. The plasma had a solid physical impact against his haki, making a strange metallic grinding noise. You can't beat my haki, Straw Hat. He kept having to block, unable to slip out of the attack's path. His coat and suit started to smolder from the heat and he began to sweat. "Just fucking watch me." Luffy cackled, roaring out as he intensified it even more. Waves upon waves of plasma erupted from him, slowly starting to get white as the heat intensified and started to flow faster and faster. He also expanded the radius of the attack, losing some heat but ensuring Oniguma wouldn't be able to simply drop from the sky to evade it. Sanji, Zoro, and Nami were struggling. Of the two vice admirals, Doberman was definitely stronger. His Busmshaku was more refined and he could cover more of his body with it. Oniguma had his devil fruit and his hatchet rick, but Doberman did not. He focused entirely on his body and his haki. As such, he was stronger than Zoro even with Zoro's Ichi and Nai gorilla techniques, faster than Sanji, and definitely nowhere near as frail as Nami. Had these been one-on-one fights instead, it was a foregone conclusion. And even 3-on-1, the fight still wasn't in their favor. The numbers advantage barely made a difference. All three of them were hurt, with multiple bruises covering Sanji's legs, cuts littering Zoro's, and a whole bunch of grime covering Nami. Nami hadn't dared get too close, so she wasn't hurt overly much like the other two, but her legs were starting to hurt keeping her in the air. "We need to do something. There's no guarantee Luffy will be able to help." She didn't want to waste her ace in the hole unless she was sure it would hit and do maximum damage. She had been spinning her Kleem attack for a while now, spewing massive quantities of her hot and cold bubbles and generating clouds. Zoro and Sanji, meanwhile, were doing their damnedest to break through his Busmshoku. A Rankyaku from Sanji splashed on his chest, and again, the only thing marred were his clothes. "Why do you weaklings struggle?" Doberman asked, racing towards Zoro and nearly knocking him out of the sky with a powerful swipe of his sword. "You will not win. We will drag and parade your bodies through the streets. Evil will not flourish under my watch." "Oh, shut up, will ya?" Nami yelled at him as a Rankyaku from her splashed on his back. He turned to her, "Even a waif like you is capable of our secret technique." His face darkened, heresy. He roared, blitzing towards her and cutting her head off. His eyes widened, "What?" She wavered like a mirage, and then he grunted. Two separate Rankyaku from Nami and Sanji both hit him in the same knee at the same time, and Sanji's rage from thinking he had just seen their beautiful navigator die empowered his blow. They didn't penetrate, but the grinding actually started to crush the man's knee between them. Instantly, Doberman's Gepm started losing effectiveness, but now he was furious. "Rog!" he yelled, throwing an air slash at Sanji. The blonde dodged, but Doberman put on a burst of speed, determined to kill at least one of them right away. Zoro appeared in front of him, and Doberman swiped down. Zoro caught the blade on Yubashiri, but had a flash of something go through his mind, and a kick from his front leg had him fly back. It saved his life. Doberman's katana shattered Yubashiri, sending pieces of it flying through the air. Yet much to Doberman's surprise, he was unable to accomplish his goal of cutting Zoro in half. Zoro's hasty dodge as well as his Tekai meant even his hockey-imbued blade only managed to slash through his chest, turning Mihawk's parting gift into an X. Zoro hacked as he fell out of the sky, crashing on the deck of the Going Merry. "Zoro Morimo." Nami and Sanju cried out in horror. Nami ground her teeth as she raised her weapon. They had to put the hurt on him, which meant the time to be conservative was over. She had been spinning her staff and generating small clouds for a while now, so she prepared to send a thunderball at it, lightningly she started to say, but Doberman wasn't idle. With a snap of his hand, he snagged one of the spinning broken pieces of Yubashiri from the air and whirled around, throwing it hard and unerringly at Nami's forehead. Nami swan. Sanji threw himself in its path as Nami was completely unprepared for it. He clenched his muscles as hard as he could, but it wasn't enough. His Tekai could protect him, but his eye wasn't a muscle. "Sanji." Nami cried out in horror as he howled, clutching his face. Doberman quickly appeared in his own sorrow and kicked Sanji in the chest, launching him away from Nami. Sanji hacked out a bit of blood as he flew back, and then Doberman turned to Nami. "Die, Storm Empress. For absolute justice." He roared, closing in on the Mikan-loving woman. Down below, Robin had been startled as a bloody Zoro landed next to her and turned her attention upwards. Ice flooded through her as she crossed her arms. Normally, Doberman's Kenbun-shoku would have been up to the task of seeing such a thing coming. It wasn't a matter of focus or even just not paying attention with his victory secure. Robin's attack was just that fast. He had no time to react as the arm popped out of his chest as if it was performing sorrow on its own. "Shigen." Robin's voice cried out as her finger pierced straight through Doberman's throat. Instantly, his hand clasped his throat as his injury started pouring blood, with the man rasping in panic. The arm vanished, with Robin hissing down below as she grabbed her very broken finger. Nami saw her moment and the clouds above them rumbled, thunderbolt tempo. She screamed, directing a massive lightning bolt at Doberman. The vice admiral had covered himself in haki and used Tekai, but against a lightning strike of that magnitude, it was less than useless. His every nerve could be seen as he was electrocuted, and when the lightning finally cleared, his entire form was black not with haki, but with soot. His muscles were spasming, and even his haki was failing. Sanji appeared using Soru, his hair brushed away from his other eye. His legs were on fire and blazing hot, diable mouton shot. He yelled, his flaming legs vibrating so hard they appeared to be shaking. The impact smashed into Doberman and lit him on fire, flinging him down towards the Mary. He crashed onto the deck and rolled, shakily trying to get to his feet. Zoro had somehow gotten to his feet despite the wound on his chest, his face even angrier than Nami and Sanji's. He had needed to move Wadam to his right hand, and both of his remaining blades were black with Busumshoku, though he had sheathed them for some reason. He rushed forward and drew both blades with a blindingly fast motion, Nitmrik. Shishikinkan Kyoku. He slashed, appearing behind the vice admiral with both of his blades sliding back into their sheaths. For a moment nothing happened, and then Zoro's swords clicked home, and Doberman's chest positively erupted with blood, spilling it across the deck. The vice admiral's head flew through the air before landing in the ocean with a wet plop. Zoro panted as he stood up, before stumbling and dropping to a knee. Zoro. Valerie yelled as she landed, completely matted in sweat. She crawled over and gently took his face in her hands. Fucking hell, was one gaping chest wound not enough for you? The battle was essentially almost over. Mary looked more like a porcupine than a sheep at the moment, but that was a far sight better than the flaming wrecks of the marine fleet. Nami and Sanji crashed onto the deck next, with Nami holding onto Sanji and pressing her shirt to his face. She saw the gaping wound in Zoro's chest and let out a strangled gasp, Chopper. She yelled, Chopper, get up here. Sanji and Zoro are hurt bad. Zoro huffed and pushed her away slightly, staggering over to Doberman while dripping blood on the deck of the ship. His jaw was clenched as he stared at the dead marine. Closing his eyes, he bowed, I wasn't strong enough. You would have won. He growled, thanks for the fight. He reached down and plucked the unnamed katana from Doberman's still clenched fist. He looked at it grimly, still pissed off at losing Yubashiri. That was a gift. Damn it, he grabbed the sheath as well and slid the blade home, affixing it on his belt. I need to train more. He stumbled to his weights before Chopper crashed into him. Oh no you don't. Chopper roared in his face as he stabbed a syringe into Zoro's arm, stay the hell still while I clean this. He growled, don't you dare move and make me prioritize you instead of Sanji. Zoro struggled for a moment, but then the drug started to take effect and he started to drift off. Up above, Onigumo was grinding his teeth in increasing panic. Luffy's beam hadn't petered out. In fact, it was only intensifying. Growing hotter and heavier. Onigumo's haki was starting to fail him. He couldn't get out of the beam's path because he was too busy trying to keep it from engulfing him entirely. His clothes had already mostly burned off, and the heat from his metal helmet was actually searing his head. He would have ripped it off ages ago if he could spare even a single arm. His swords were even starting to glow white hot beneath their Busumshoku coating. They were probably fused to his hands now. I need to do something. I won't lose here. Justice cannot fail. With a roar, he put everything into 8 simultaneous air slashes, finally throwing the beam off of him and trying to retreat. Luffy appeared in front of him, and Onigumo choked as he recognized the stance he was in. No. Berkulgan. Luffy roared, and his body pulsed. Blood erupted from Onigumo's mouth as he hadn't even been able to put up a minor haki defense. Defending against the beam had been exhausting. And now his organs were pulverized. He was dead and he knew it. But I'll be damned if I go alone. He turned his glowing blades to Luffy and stabbed with all 8 of them. Luffy raised 2 staves again, and with Onigumo's weakened haki, cut clean through 6 of them. The last pair got through. Both fighters howled as Luffy burned off Onigumo's human arms and 2 of the extra pairs, while Onigumo stabbed both glowing and very lightly haki-armored remaining blades into both of Luffy's thighs. GHHH. Luffy roared, feeling the blades sticking out of the back of his thighs. He couldn't keep them up any longer, and both of them fell. Luffy. Nami, Valerie, Robin, and Chopper yelled in horror as both fighters fell into the ocean. No. Nami screamed, diving off of the Mary. The water cavitated around her as she used Soru and Geppim to reach her lover. She let out a pained hiss as the superheated water burned her a bit, but she grabbed her unconscious captain and hauled them both out of the water. She screamed as they burst from the depths, Onigumo sinking right towards the bottom. Her legs were burning again, and now there was actual burning to contend with. It was all she could do to grab the rope Valerie tossed her and hold on. She growled in exertion as Robin and Valerie hauled them up the side of the ship, and then Robin's arms could grab them to carry them the rest of the way up. Captain and navigator rolled onto the deck, mercifully unconscious. The Going Mary sailed on, towards her new destination, leaving the devastation of a marine fleet in her wake. Ever since she was a little girl and had seen her hometown invaded by pirates, Tashigi had a good opinion of the Marines. They had saved hundreds of lives fighting those scum at the cost of their own. It had inspired her. She'd always adored the way of the sword and had always been fascinated by the might. Joining the Marines had seemed like a perfect match. Fight for justice. Defeat evil men. Confiscate the might, which most certainly did not belong in evil hands. For years, she had trained her hardest to be worthy of one day wearing a white coat of her own. She had put the Marine organization on a pedestal. She had thought that they were the good guys. The paragons of good. The heroes. And heroes never lost, right? And then the Straw Hats had beat their asses and saved Alabasta, and headquarters tried to give them credit for it. Captain Smoker had been carved up like a turkey, Tashigi herself had been knocked out with little to no effort, and Hina had barely even gotten a few licks in before being defeated herself. And for their trouble, they'd been given promotions for doing less than nothing. Captain Smoker had raised unholy hell over it. And why wouldn't he? Crocodile was dead. Vaporized. How the hell did HQ expect Smoker to do that? Even if he hadn't been left half dead, he couldn't have done that. The defeat hurt, but the blow to their pride was far worse. To be capable of doing nothing worthwhile and then praised for it on a bed of incredibly flimsy lies. Especially when the king and princess of Alabasta had all but come out and given the names of their saviors and made it very clear that the Marines had nothing to do with it, especially when all the Marines had done was try to stop the real heroes. Tashigi couldn't have been more disappointed with the Marines if she tried. But she had kept her mouth shut under her superior's orders. According to the newly minted and very displeased Commodore Smoker, he had enough vitriol for their bosses for the both of them. Smoker had raised all kinds of hell about how the Marines hadn't done a thing to stop Crocodile and pirates had done all the work. Now, a day or two before the true heroes of Alabasta even left the Desert Kingdom, here they were, arriving at G2 Marine Base for what was ostensibly a resupply, but Tashigi feared was most certainly a tribunal. Commodore Smoker, sir, doesn't this seem a bit much? Her ever-gruff superior simply grunted around his cigars in reply. It'll be fine, Tashigi. Worst comes to worst, I'll have my promotion revoked. As he spoke, the sailors worked to bring the ship into port. So far as the men were aware, they were getting 2 days shore leave as their ship was resupplied. While they'd have preferred to spend their leave somewhere nicer than a marine base, any leave was fine by them. Alongside their ship, Hina's own flagship pulled into port as well, also for resupply and minor repairs. In reality, she was acting as an escort to make sure Smoker didn't pull a runner. The pink-haired captain took a drag off her cigarette as she considered the situation. Like Smoker and Tashigi, she knew why they were really there. Unlike her old friend, she was fairly certain he'd be lucky to just get demoted back to captain. More likely, he'd be facing an honorable discharge. After all, the world government had already decided on who was getting credit for Crocodile's arrest. They couldn't exactly put his discharge down as dishonorable, now could they? Foregoing the gangplank, Hina simply leapt down onto the dock to meet Smoker and his second-in-command. A petty officer awaited them, a young man who had replaced his standard marine cap with a white balaclava of all things. Saluting sharply, he greeted them, "Welcome sir, ma'ams. I am Petty Officer Machine and I will be escorting you to the meeting." With an irritable grumble, Smoker said, "They just need me for the meeting. You two can go wait in our quarters." Ignoring Machine's confused look, Hina pulled her cigarette from her mouth before answering, "Hina doesn't take orders from you, Smoker." Still, Hina is hungry and could use a good meal. Before she could move away however, Smoker grabbed her shoulder and quietly whispered something to his old classmate. She gave no reply to him, instead raising her voice and calling out to Smoker's second-in-command, "Let us go, Tashigi." She didn't even give the junior officer a chance to respond before she marched off. Quickly looking back and forth between the two, Tashigi snapped a quick salute towards her superior before hurrying after the other woman. When Smoker stepped into the room where he knew his career would be decided, he almost froze. The head of G2, one Vice Admiral Kamal, was expected. He was the leader of the base, after all. And for a tribunal, the sight of Vice Admirals Bastille, Cancer and Strawberry were also expected. Admiral Kizaru sitting lazily at the head of the table was not. Smoker swallowed his surprise, "Admiral Kizaru." He greeted one of his old mentors, "It's good to see you." He bowed his head. "I wish I could say the same, Smoker-kun." Kizaru replied, his voice as lax as ever. Despite that, Smoker nearly bowed his head. Apparently, he had already been found guilty before he'd even arrived. Though he knew it was likely the end of his career, Smoker wasn't particularly worried. Hina might ride his ass, but she'd handle his request for old time's sake. Besides, his subordinates were smart enough to keep their heads down. Regardless, he refused to be part of a bullshit cover-up like this. The Marines hadn't managed to do a damn thing to stop Crocodile, no matter what the world government tried to claim. Alabasta, home to one of the original 20 founding families, had been forced to rely on pirates to save them. His attention was drawn back to Kizaru, but it appears you've found yourself in a bit of a pickle, hasn't it? Smoker simply nodded. Then I suppose we're ready to begin. Are you prepared? I am. Smoker said calmly. Very well. Admiral Kizaru let out a sigh. Commodore Smoker, your charges are as follows. Abandoning your post in Logtown, Smoker hit a wince. Well, that wasn't a good start, and for your information, it took less than a month for pirates to start swarming there again. This time, he could not hide the wince, as such, that charge has been upgraded to dereliction of duty and desertion. Further, you are charged with theft of government property, forcing dozens of other Marines to follow your lead in abandoning their posts, and insubordination. Well, that was certainly an unexpected laundry list of crimes he was being accused of. And the worst part was that he could not even deny any of it. He did abandon his post to chase the Straw Hats. But that wasn't really what was worrying him. What was worrying him was that for all their rules and regulations, cowboys like him were not uncommon. As long as a leader did what they did to serve justice and got results, generally they could get away with leaving their post. Especially if it was to chase dangerous pirates. Smoker couldn't actually remember the last time anyone in the Corps had charges like these levied. How do you plead? Admiral Kizaru asked. Guilty. Smoker said, without hesitation. I did what I thought was right and tried to bring the Straw Hats to justice. You did, Kizaru drawled, what your pride demanded. The statement made Smoker's fists tighten. You chased the Straw Hats when you had no true hope of victory. I've read the reports. And not only that, but you also started a fight with Fire Fist Ace. I understand wanting to put pirates behind bars. I wouldn't be where I am now if I did not share that same desire. He let out a sigh, but one must learn prudence as well. You were outmatched and the best solution was to retreat and request backup. Instead, you put the citizens of Alabasta in unnecessary danger and later were nearly killed by a man who did not even possess an elemental counter to your own powers like Straw Hat did. His Busmshoku was unexpected, but it never should have gotten that far in the first place. And then to start raising a stink over the official story on Alabasta and again showing your insubordination rather than treating that promotion like a scar and getting stronger for it. He tilted his head. You understand why you are here, correct? Smoker clenched his teeth around his cigar. Yes, Admiral. He refused to apologize. He refused to be rewarded for failure. Things were out of his hands now. Good. Kizaru sighed again. I have heard enough. He looked around to the other vice admirals and got nods from all of them. Commodore Smoker, we have reached a verdict. Kizaru stated, straightening up for the first time. Are you prepared? I am, sir. Was his simple reply. So be it. And then Smoker blinked and found himself on the floor. He tried to take a breath in shock, but could only gurgle. He shakily raised his head and patted his chest, where 3 burning holes now smoked. I'm sorry, Smoker-kun. Kizaru, to his credit, did look apologetic as he stared down at him. But the higher-ups can't leave a valuable Loja like yours in the hands of such an insubordinate hothead. He sighed, why couldn't you have swallowed your pride just this once? Never. Smoker thought to himself, but he had neither the energy nor the air to say it. Kizaru must have seen something in his face though because he closed his eyes in sadness. In honor of your service, you will be posthumously promoted to Rear Admiral. Smoker was growing cold. Numb. He shakily raised a hand, but he couldn't do anything, and it flopped. As his vision grew dark, he heard one last thing. It is unfortunate that you succumbed to your injuries from stopping Crocodile, but you will be remembered as a hero. The Shiggy had joined Hina in the room the new Commodore had been given, and the two had sat at Hina's temporary table. Shiggy forced a giggle despite the feeling of uneasiness she had started to feel. So, what did you think of Captain T-Bone's story? They had mingled for a few minutes with their fellow officers in the mess before grabbing some food and bringing it up to Hina's quarters. Hina snorted. Hina thinks too many pirates are obsessed with their facial hair. She snarked, thinking of how T-Bone had defeated this purplebeard by cutting the man's ship's mast in half and causing it to crash on his head. Or at least that was the claim. Shiggy frowned. Yeah, you're right. Everyone knows Whitebeard, but there's also Peachbeard, Brownbeard, Purplebeard, and I think I heard of a Bluebeard making waves in the South Blue. Hina also heard of a Blackbeard, though we don't have a picture or anything. Hina added on, I heard he did some terrible things in the Drum Kingdom, but that was out of my jurisdiction. They settled in companionable silence for a few moments, unable to distract themselves any longer. How long do you think it will take? Hina let out a sigh as she grabbed one of the fruits, an apple specifically, and bit into it. Not long. She said, after taking a few minutes to chew. Hina worried. She admitted, Smoker-kun has been insubordinate before, but they never had him escorted to a base before. The Shiggy grimaced as she took one of the cantaloupe and grabbed a knife. You too, huh? He's never been shy on disobeying orders and has gotten in trouble before, but this feels different. She did not get the reply she expected. The strangled gasp that ripped out of Hina's throat as she surged out of her chair made Toshigi squeak. "Commodore, what are she?" Looked down. For a moment, she didn't understand what she was seeing. She gazed in complete and total miscomprehension over what her eyes were seeing. The cantaloupe she had grabbed and had been absently rolling around had changed. The bumpy gray-green skin had smoothed out. Instead, it was now a medium dark gray and had swirl patterns that looked vaguely like clouds on it. The stem had regrown, with half of it curling. Intellectually, she understood that she was looking at a devil fruit. She even had a pretty solid idea which fruit given its appearance. But that small rational part of her mind was being drowned out by the emotional majority that refused to acknowledge what almost certainly happened. But the sheer look of destroyed shock on Hina's face as she whispered, "Smoker-kun shattered that." "No." Toshigi started to shake her head. "No. No. No 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 no. He was fine. The doctor said he was fine." She nearly started to hyperventilate. "No, she choked back a sob. "No they can't." Hina reached for the fruit and the knife Toshigi had grabbed and took them from her. She raised the knife and slammed it through the fruit, her face thunderous. Another chop separated a bite-sized piece and she picked it up and held it towards Toshigi. The swordswoman looked to Shen as she shook her head and "No, I can't, Hina." "Toshigi." Hina said firmly, "We both know what happened." Smoker-kun she took a deep furious breath, "You're the only one he would want to have it." Toshigi bowed her head and let out a keening sound, biting her knuckle to try to muffle it. Finally, she raised her head, her eyes rimmed with red and a fury matching Hina's glaring out. She took a piece and bit down, and such was her rage that she truly blocked out the taste. She swallowed it after barely chewing, which hurt going down. She looked down at her arm and just touched the new feeling she had in her brain, watching as her arm dissolved into smoke. That was it. Confirmation. Damn them. She ground out, "Damn them." She slammed her fist into the table and again, it just dispersed into smoke. "Focus, Toshigi," Hina said, "and draw it in for now." Hina looked just as furious as her junior. "Go clean yourself up. We're leaving." "Where will we even go?" Toshigi asked, her rage extinguished by bitter despair as the full scope of the Marine's corruption became apparent to her. "Hina doesn't know." The pink-haired Commodore said softly, "But anywhere is better than here. Smoker asked me to look after you if his career was destroyed. I doubt he expected it to happen quite like this, but Hina will fulfill her promise." Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed.